July 15th for a series of discussions about technology competition, contesting the virtual playing field. The first session is going to be run by Liz Rosenberg, our senior fellow and director of the Energy Economics and Security Program. And the second session is going to be run by Kara Frederick from our Technology and Security Program. And she is going to lead us through a discussion about synthetic media and the illiberal uses of technology. Okay, now a moment everyone's been waiting for. Going to bring on my co-host, your main host for today, Lauren DeYoung-Schulman. She served for several years as CNAS's Deputy Director of Studies and our Leon Panetta Senior Fellow. She is the vice president at the Partnership for Public Service. And of course, as most of our audience watching knows, the host of the amazing Bombshell podcast that is run by War on the Rocks. And with that, I want to welcome Lauren.
Thanks, Shai. I am so excited to be here this afternoon. As your co-host, as your partner in crime, your battle buddy, we are going to have an amazing afternoon. So as Shai was saying, I spent many wonderful years at the Center for New American Security. And part of our mission there that is really important to me and to all of you is to develop, to promote, and to showcase diversity of thought and diversity of leadership. We at the Center for New American Security really want to focus on the next generation community, but also next generation ideas. In our work, being an ally, a mentor, or a sponsor is not just about the occasional coffees or the retweets or the offers to introduce people, but really putting the spotlight on people, on ideas and concepts, and giving them a platform and investing in the implementation of those ideas. The pitch, what we're doing today, is our latest effort in this mission, and it comes at a time where I think there's a real hunger for big think, for new concepts, for creativity in national security. With the pandemic going on, great power competition, the desire amongst the American people to see a government that works for them and with them, the last 2 decades of war, the crazy numbers of emerging technologies we see impacting the security sphere, and an emerging political landscape that looks unfamiliar to many of us. This is a point in time where I'm going to be turning to the smartest folks in the room and saying, what should we do? So we brought them to you. But before we get to our competition, I want to turn it over to the biggest champion of all these missions that I just spoke about, and our dear leader at CNAS, Richard Fontaine, who is the CEO at the Center for New American Security, is a mentor and friend to so many of us. And as I said before, the biggest champion of this next generation leadership and next generation community that we're trying to build with the pitch today. So Richard, let me turn it over to you for some opening remarks, and then we'll get started with our competition.
All right, well, thank you, Lauren and Shai, and thanks to everybody who is joining us in watching this or participating in whatever capacity as participants and judges. As Shai mentioned, this is the second session in CNAS's summer series. I know many of you were able to join the first one of these. We did some detailed scenario planning work that examines the world after coronavirus. That was a really, really productive session. And we got a huge number of ideas, and we're working those results into the thinkings that you'll see emerge later on. For those of you who weren't able to join that session, this CNAS summer series is what was formerly and futurely will likely be known as the CNAS annual conference that generally takes place in person right about now. In lieu of that this year, we have 4 virtual events, and today's really is a particularly special one. This pitch, it's a competition of ideas, a contest to identify specific national security problems and to find real solutions to them. And I'd like to thank all the contestants in advance, not just for their ideas, which I think will be really striking to everyone, but also for the boldness with which they put them on the public table. Your participation in today's exercise, as Lauren said, it's an element in CNAS's commitment to elevating the next generation of national security thinkers and elevating a new generation of national security thought. before I turn things back over, let me take just a moment to thank the conference sponsors who helped make all of this possible. And that includes Huntington Ingalls Industries, Microsoft Corporation, Palace Advisors, and UPS. Thanks also to the Common Mission Project, which helps sponsor the pitch. Common Mission is a project that works to create an international network of entrepreneurs that are driven to solve the critical challenges of our time. So a lot of overlap in mission with what we're trying to accomplish here, and it's great to work with them. In just a minute, we're going to get on with the show. In the meantime, as Shai mentioned, feel free to join in the conversation. You can do that on social media, through Twitter, hashtag CNES 2020. You can go to the live stream chat and take part in that way. And a reminder that we'll be getting together again virtually on July 15th for the next conference session on technology competition. And now, without any further ado, let me all encourage you to channel your inner Simon Cowells, and I will turn the floor back over to Lauren and Shai, who will explain the rules of the pitch, and we will get started. So over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Richard. So this afternoon is going to be complicated. So I'm going to lay out all the moving pieces, the participants, the judges, the rules, the background. I want to remind everyone that this is live. We are doing something that I think that even most television shows aren't trying to do right now. Saturday Night Live has nothing on us, but as a result, we may have some hiccups throughout the day, and that's okay. We'll work through them. Most important thing is championing these incredible contestants, their ideas, and figuring out ways that we can bring their big think into implementation over the long term. So let's start with going over today's format. Earlier this year, we recruited today's slate of competitors, 16 folks, to make their pitch for innovative policy ideas that will renew American competitiveness. They were selected from a huge pool of applicants, and they will compete in 4 different heats throughout the course of the afternoon. Each heat is focused on a different area of competition. The economy and technology is the first one. We'll start that in just a minute. Military and defense will be the next. Alliances and multilateralism, and the national security institutions, my personal favorite, but I'm not biased. We all know that senior leaders have absolutely zero time. So in order to bring that element into the competition, we wanted to give participants only 2 minutes to make their big pitch. That's frankly a lot longer than a lot of folks get in order to chat with a senior leader, but we'll have 120 seconds, 2 minutes to get through their big idea and how they want to see it being implemented over the course of the next several years. They will be making their pitch to a distinguished slate of judges, but just as importantly, as Shai was saying, to all of you, and you'll be a part of that conversation in selecting our People's Choice winner, which we'll talk about the rules for in just a minute. At the end of every heat, after all of the contestants make their pitch, they will be asked a single question by our panel of judges. The judges will be scoring each pitch based on some very specific criteria that we've got to assess their ingenuity, the ingenuity of the idea, the practicality of the idea. Can we actually make this happen? The rigor, the academic rigor behind it. Does it make sense? Does it follow history? Does it reference all the many ideas that came before? And the clarity of presentation. We have some incredible judges that I want to introduce. First up, we have Carrie Cordero, who is the Robert M. Gates Senior Fellow at the Center for New American Security. You may also have seen her on CNN, where she is a national security and legal analyst. Next up, we have former CNES Next Gen Fellow, because we're all in the family here, Dave Zikusoka. Currently, Dave is a research fellow in aerospace studies at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. And finally, the part I'm most excited about, we've got 2 winners of the 2019 CNES Andrew J. Basovich Jr. Award, Christine Lee and Cole Stevens. Christine is an associate fellow here in the CNES Asia Pacific Security Program. She's been featured in incredible outlets from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN. Please follow her career. She's someone you want to watch. And next, Cole Stevens. He is the communications officer here at CNES, and also serves as an officer and the U.S. Army National Guard, where he recently returned from actually leading a mission related to COVID-19 response. So in this virtual world, one more point on judging. I want to make clear that we're not judging anyone on the fanciness of their microphone, on the floral arrangements they have behind them, on pets, on fruit. We're welcome to have Room Raider come join the conversation, have him offer that, but that's not part of what we are, our judges, or we're asking you to make judgments on today. So point on judging. The contestant that gets the highest score in each heat, based on all the factors that I just mentioned, will be one of our 4 finalists that is up for a Best in Show award. And our 2 distinguished judges that we'll introduce later, Michelle Flournoy, with former CNAS CEO, and Mike Zach, a CNAS board member, will select today's overall champion. If you win the championship, or if you're one of the finalists, you're going to get a wonderful slate of prizes associated with and supported by our partner in this event, the Common Mission Project. We'll work closely with each winner in the 4 heats to further develop and support their pitch. We don't want this just to be about today, but about taking their idea to the next step, whether it be connecting them with the right audiences and stakeholders, building their professional network, featuring them in CNAS products and social media, or getting them on a podcast, whatever makes sense for their idea. And then with the Best in Show winner will receive some other prizes associated with their championship. But that is not all. As Shai said, we are relying on all of you in the audience, not just to cheer everybody on, not just to comment on social media, and share feedback and questions, but to help us at the end of the day in picking the people's choice, which we hope and anticipate have very different assessments than what our judges pick out today. So after the final heat, we'll want to hear from you on which pitch has won your hearts and minds, or if you're a senior leader, has won your time or your budget or your willingness to have 300 meetings on a topic, because it's so important. But as a last reminder before I turn it back over to Shai, I think I want to re-emphasize to you guys that this event is not just about the winners, though I'm excited about bringing us all through this competition, but about showcasing these folks and their amazing ideas that they have brought to the table so bravely today, and we'll see over the course of the next few hours. One more prize I'll mention, because I promise to bring up Bull Durham whenever I can, is that candlesticks also make a nice gift if anyone wants to put that up. Shai, can you talk a little bit more about audience engagement?
Absolutely. This is all about audience engagement, and in the command center over here, I am able to watch all sorts of amazing things that are happening here. The action on Twitter, as well as the fact that we've got well over 100 people watching live on our conference website. So if you are watching live on our conference website, you are already half a step away from being able to chat, vote, and do all of the audience participation that we need to help elevate these amazing contestants today. So if you're one of the people watching on our conference website, go to the tippy top right of the screen. You'll see there's a little person outline. Click on that. You can log in using your Facebook, your Twitch account, because we're very hip and we have a Twitch login on our site, as well as you can just enter your email address. And once you do that, it's very, very quick. You'll be able to scroll through the tabs on the side and vote as we go through our polling. And our first poll is coming up very soon. We really want to hear everybody's answers. And you can also, if you don't end up logging in, just hashtag CNAS 2020, comment there. And we have a team of folks that are watching and seeing, and we will read out some of the comments and maybe even have some of the judges respond as we go. We are about to get going with our first heat, but again, want to get everybody ready with the interactive portion. I'm going to read out the first poll of the day. So that poll will be live on our website on the polling tab. It's got a little check mark on it. And the first question of the day, and this is really going to tell us what the audience is most excited for also, which area needs the most immediate attention and investment to maintain American competitiveness in national security? Number 1, alliances and multilateralism. Number 2, economics. Number 3, technology. Number 4, national security institutions. That's Lauren's favorite topic. The structures, the agencies, the processes, the human capital. Or number 6, again, this is interactive. Give us your own answer. Tweet it at the hashtag or drop it in the chat, and we'll come back to it later. Love to see the audience voting right now. And when we get out of the heats later, we'll come back to the answers and read out those answers. So I think we are getting just about ready to start our first heat. And our first heat's theme is economics and technology. Lauren, do you have anything you want to expand on for that particular theme before we introduce our amazing contestants?
Absolutely. So in this first heat, as Shai said, what we asked all of our contestants to focus on a new idea in technology or economic policy that would bolster American competitiveness in the world and enhance the prosperity of the American people. You know, really easy stuff like that. No big deal. This is a tough question. I think that economics and technology are areas that a lot of folks in national security have long felt uncomfortable with. This is quite often areas that we don't study as hard when we go to grad school, that we are told to stay away from when we are in our jobs at the State Department or Department of Defense. But we, I think, as a whole, have learned that they are absolutely integral to the execution of our national security strategy. So I'm thrilled that we're showcasing these folks first. We'll be hearing from Tina Huang, Alan McQuinn, Christine Peterson, and Daniel Ramlaris. But I want to, before I turn it over to them, Shai, is our first pitch ready?
Our first pitcher is ready. We've got Tina Huang, and she should be on. We're just going to do a tech check with her as soon as we can see Tina. Tina, can you hear us?
Yep.
All right. Can you hear us? Can you see us? We can see you.
Yep.
All right. Your time begins now.
In 1903, America gathered to witness Samuel Langley's plane be the first to take flight. Backed by $50,000 from the government, Langley on paper was the most qualified scientist for the job. But instead, the crowd watched his plane crash into the Potomac River. And days later, the Wright brothers went airborne on a $2,000 budget. America's technological strength has always been underpinned by innovative minds at universities and businesses, small and large. Advancing AI is no different, but high barriers to entry has restricted meaningful AI breakthroughs to a select few. And why is that? Well, AI consists of three core ingredients: data, computing power, and algorithms. The possibilities of what AI can do exploded in recent years due to the increase of data and the expansion of computing power needed to train complex algorithms. But two of these three ingredients now pose as bottlenecks for further progress. Data is fragmented within and between sectors. Computing power requirements have skyrocketed, leading to high energy costs. For example, Google's Mina chat box cost $1.5 million to train. Only big tech companies can overcome these barriers, leaving universities and startups behind. So, to lower these barriers, a national cloud is necessary. Data across government, industry, and academia can be accessible, standardized, and federated so that innovators can go to one location to access multiple data sources. And computing power can be subsidized or distributed in grants so smaller organizations aren't financially burdened. And overall, it's clear that public-private partnerships will be critical to making this idea work. We must democratize data and computing power so that every innovative mind in America, not just those at prestigious institutions, have the resources to achieve the next groundbreaking AI discovery. The Wright brothers of AI are out there, and we need to equip them with a national cloud so that America can pave the future of AI. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina. All right, we are going to get our next pitcher ready. We've got Alan McQuinn up. Alan, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Can you see us?
I can indeed.
Well, we can see you, which means your time begins now.
Great. I have a wonky one for you guys today. Academic security is a national priority. Each day, our universities are bombarded with cyber attacks by our adversaries to steal sensitive ideas and breakthroughs. For example, one university reported fending off an average of 22 million cyber attacks per day. And the categories of information that we deem worthy of protection from our adversaries are also expanding. Take, for example, research into an AI system that can track whales, that can also be used to track our submarines. Even outside the classified space, our government requires non-federal entities to protect what is called controlled unclassified information, or CUI. And this is included in many grant programs. These requirements to protect this information are incredibly resource intensive. But academia was built for the free exchange of ideas, not the restriction of information. As such, many universities are ill-equipped to create the secure environments necessary to protect CUI. They bristle at expanding definitions, and most importantly, they calculate that operating CUI protective systems is often more expensive than the revenue that they can generate from CUI-related grants themselves. Therefore, to promote academic security at our universities, the US government should engage in a two-pronged approach to this challenge. First, on an ongoing basis, we must clarify and offer guidance about what is covered in the definition of CUI and its security requirements. The National Archives and Records Administration and NIST should establish a joint task force dedicated to this goal. Second, DoD and NSF should create a joint grant program that universities can apply to for the establishment of proper security environments for both classified and controlled unclassified information. That's my pitch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Right under the wire there. Appreciate your pitch. Now we're getting our next pitcher up. And remember, at the end of Heat 1, the pitchers will get questions from our judges. It's going to be a lot of fun seeing them on the hot seat. And our next pitcher is Christine Peterson. Christine, are you ready? You got to unmute yourself.
There we go.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
We can hear you, which means your time begins now.
50% of civilian casualties in warfare are not collateral damage, but misidentified as combatants. As we innovate to adapt to the threats of tomorrow, we must take explicit steps to ensure we adhere to the laws, policies, and values that distinguish us from our enemies by centering the protection of civilians in innovation. First, we should create a rotating seat on the Defense and Innovation Board for a humanitarian professional. Having witnessed the impact of indiscriminate warfare firsthand, this advisor will provide a crucial context and humanitarian perspective currently lacking on the advisory board. Second, civilian protection should serve as a unique area of focus for the Defense Innovation Unit. This will put to task the greatest minds in the private and public sector to think creatively about protection in warfare from the outset. This is not just a feel-good idea, but a strategic and tactical imperative. Strategically, this is an issue of effectiveness. Furthermore, any smart weaponry that can discern between enemy combatant and civilian could potentially discern between our enemy's fighters and our own. If high-intensity conflict is in our future, we should be agile now to prepare for this reality. Innovating weaponry around civilian protection also has the potential to strengthen our relationships with our allies and partner nations by increasing our credibility on the battlefield and decreasing the risk of complicity and end-use abuses by American-made weapons and security assistance. At the tactical level, protection of civilians is an ethical concern, one that runs the risk of exposing troops to moral injury and exacerbating the epidemic of suicide amongst our service members and veterans. Improving accountability on weaponry after it's been deployed is not only a bureaucratic challenge, but also one which challenges our service members to admit to potential complicity in accidental civilian deaths. By innovating weaponry around the protection of civilians from the outset, we can disrupt this dynamic before deployment in design. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Again, right under the wire, using that time so well. We got a question from one of our viewers as to why we were moving so quickly and we are just saying the names of the speakers right before they speak. And the reason why we're saying their names and not getting into elaborate bios is because today is all about showcasing the ideas. It's about showcasing the ideas and our speakers. However, if you'd like to learn more about our speakers, go to the conference.cnas.org/live website. I can see hundreds of people are on there right now. If you scroll down on that page, you'll actually be able to see bios of all of our judges, all of our speakers. You can even read my bio, which is by far the least interesting of the group. Again, today is all about the ideas and not so much the history of our individual speakers in terms of the actual competition. With that in mind, we have the last speaker of our heat coming up, Mr. Daniel Remler. Daniel, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. We can see you. You can see us?
Yep.
Right, then you know how it goes. Your time begins now.
Good afternoon, everyone. The United States today faces two major threats to our economic competitiveness: First, our decaying infrastructure, and second, our lack of investment in new technology, in particular, the federal government's declining investment in anything beyond basic research. Both require federal funding, but we can't rely on Congress alone. My proposal is that the United States, through an act of Congress, establish a state-owned investment bank capable of making loans and equity investments in large-scale infrastructure and technology projects. This independent federal agency would be funded through capital markets and its own return on investments, and able to make strategic decisions without regular interference from Congress. This funding model makes the bank sensitive to making good investments while insulating it from the political process of appropriations. And because these are government bonds, investors would be eager to buy and support the bank. One good example of the kind of project this bank would support is nuclear power. There is significant ongoing innovation in creating miniature nuclear reactors, but the private sector is too risk averse to support such a project at scale. That's where the investment bank steps in. Another might be high-speed rural broadband, a capital-intensive and lengthy project that politicians have advocated for decades now, that the private sector has been unwilling to supply. Implementing such an investment bank would be to take what has worked in other countries and adapt it to the American experience. This proposal is directly modeled off of Germany's KfW, a successful regional development bank that has invested in infrastructure for decades, and the United States' own Tennessee Valley Authority, which has worked well in the past. With an act of Congress, this investment bank could help jumpstart American economic growth, particularly in the post-pandemic era, and close the gap in our global competitiveness. And that's my pitch. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. I am going to pass it back over to my amazing co-host, Lauren DeYoung-Schulman, to turn to the judges' table. This is our Top Chef moment, if you will, where we're going to hear, they're going to get to put all of our speakers on the hot seat.
So, Shai, those pitches were right down the middle, some fastballs that, the likes of which we have not seen in national security before, particularly not in a live event in a virtual world as we're doing right now, and nobody's ever done. So I'm going to turn it over to judges. Just a reminder for the folks who are tuning in right now, we just finished Heat 1. We're going to have each competitor be asked one question by our amazing panel of judges, and then we'll take a little time to hear from the audience before we start with Heat 2. So first up, I want to go to Carrie Cordero to see what is her first question for, or what is her question for our contestants.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Lauren. And it's wonderful to be here with this group. Very impressive first heat of presenters today. My first question is for Tina. Tina, it's a really interesting idea to create a national cloud. My question for you pertains to cybersecurity. How would you propose that this national cloud be secured in a way that its users could have confidence in it?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that's a great question. So part of the system is that it's going to be federated. And so this will address both security and privacy concerns to a certain extent. So the data sets won't be all merged together, and access to the data sets will be determined by the owners. And this will create barriers for any hackers that may infiltrate the cloud. They can only, they won't be able to access any of the data sets. Even if they access one data set, they won't be able to see the rest. So it creates barriers for them. And it also keeps the data private so that only the owners of the data are able to grant access to anyone who wants to see it.
Thanks so much, Tina. Next, let's turn to Dave. And I'll just mention right now that I think our fourth judge, Christine Lee, is still heading back from testifying on the Hill. She's got busy things to do this afternoon, so we may turn back to Carrie for another question. But Dave, let's turn it over to you for yours.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My question is for Alan. So in the sphere of election cybersecurity, recently private sector companies like Microsoft have been offering services to campaigns that the FEC regards as an in-kind donation to help them secure their campaigns. Do you think there's a role here for the private sector to help provide these services to academic institutions? And could they maybe provide in-kind donations, or could they even do it at a relative discount to save the government some money?
I see what you're saying. The issue, of course, private sector folks can provide in-kind donations to help establish some of these security environments out of the kindness of their heart. The primary issue is the fact that we're asking a lot of these academic institutions to establish these environments and not offering them enough incentive to do so. So a lot of these activities, particularly DHS grants, are getting sequestered at only a couple different institutions. We're also at the same time expanding definitions. So while you could foresee private sector stepping up to help fill some of these gaps as it relates to cybersecurity, we haven't seen that yet. And the issue of election security is separate, I think, in this than this particular example, if that makes sense.
Great, Alan. Thank you so much. And then next question, I will turn it over to Cole.
Thanks, Lauren. My question is for Christine. Christine, you argue that humanitarians should be included in strategic conversations about the future of conflict. You mentioned bringing them on to the Defense Science Board and other leadership agencies. My question for you is there a specific example of this being implemented in the past successfully? You mentioned your firsthand experience on the ground. What would it look like to successfully have humanitarians at the table in these strategic conversations?
Yeah, thanks for your question. You can hear me? Okay, perfect. So to your first part of your question, has this been done before? Not to my knowledge, and that's why I think it's a creative idea. However, with regards to how this is going to work strategically, I think it's really important to highlight humanitarian principles and the fact that this is going to be a rotating seat in order to ensure both that the ideas remain creative, but also so that the humanitarian advisor on this role can maintain their humanitarian principles, impartiality, neutrality, and operational independence. So that being said, I think strategically how this would work, some great examples would be high-level policy advisors from organizations like ICRC, Save the Children, or UNHCR, particularly because UNHCR manages the protection cluster. And of course, as we all know, ICRC does great work in this space as well. What's really important here is that you have a humanitarian professional that is focused on man-made conflicts and not natural disasters, so that they understand not only the needs on the ground, but also the unavoidable politics of the situation as well. And they can speak essentially for the civilians who may be caught in the midst of warfare.
Christine, thank you so much. As a reminder, I said that our judge named Christine Lee is coming back from the Hill, so she's not here right now to ask her question. So I'll turn it back over to Carrie to ask her second question for this round.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So this question is for our fourth participant in this heat, Daniel. And Daniel, very interesting, intriguing idea about a state-owned investment bank. But I have a question. As you may know, I'm the lawyer on the panel, and I'm very concerned about accountability, government accountability, and the proper functioning of our democracy. And so my question for you is, how is your proposal, which I think you mentioned potentially would be insulated from congressional oversight or some political accountability, how is your proposal consistent with a representative democracy? Tell me why the lawyer in me should not be concerned about the lack of accountability that could come from the implementation of your proposal.
Sure, and I never meant to suggest that the bank would be completely devoid of political accountability. Merely that the structure would be like the TVA or like other independent agencies that have like a commission, which is even Republican and Democrat, with say the chair being appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. So some structure like that. But in general, I envision such a state-owned investment bank to be like the TVA in that it is relatively more insulated than other kinds of agencies from the political process, and its funding model through capital markets, crucially, would be independent, and that would allow it to follow more market mechanisms in making investment decisions and in making for itself and investment decisions that it makes elsewhere. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Daniel. So Heat 1, you have come through the fire and you were smoking. Congratulations on some fantastic pitches. You delivered them perfectly. I was incredibly impressed. Stick around a little bit. We may come back to you guys for some chatter. And also we'll come back to some of our fabulous judges to hear from them on their impressions of this event. As a reminder to folks, we have asked our judges to score all of the contestants on some specific criteria we've given them on ingenuity of the idea, practicality, academic rigor, and clarity of presentation. But before I drone on for too long, Shai, first of all, let me say that your background looks fabulous, which I guess that means that mine does too. But more importantly, I want to hear from the audience. That poll that we put out earlier, have we gotten the results back?
Absolutely. We have gotten the results, and there's some really interesting results. I'd love to hear your reaction, and then, of course, to hear what our judges think. At 31%, alliances and multilateralism is leading the pack by quite a lot. Economics, 13%, technology, 26%, military and defense, only 2%, and 23%, the one close to your heart, national security institutions. These were, we asked the audience which of these areas was going to make the most impact on American competitiveness, needed the most immediate attention and investment. And it seems that alliances and multilateralism really rose to the top. I myself voted for technology because I'm active in the chat. And again, we've got hundreds of viewers on the site right now. You can go and participate in our next poll, which is coming up soon. Lauren, what do you make of that? What do you make of alliances and multilateralism leading with the plurality there?
Well, first, I think it's possible that all of our friends from NATO have just been flooding the poll a little bit, so maybe outweighed a little bit by others. But
that Brussels sprouts audience.
Right. I won't, I won't make a direct accusation. I'll just share my speculation. I will say no surprise to me that national security institutions with agencies, processes, and human capital rose to the top. Without those, none of your amazing policy and strategy ideas are going to go anywhere. I am shocked to see that military and defense only got 2%. I think that reflects a lot of the writing that we've been doing at CNES over the last couple of years, that those are foundational, but we have to start with military and defense being important, and everything else kind of rises above that in terms of our own economy, our technological innovation, and our relationships with others. But I think it would be interesting to poll folks, and we can't do this now, but it would be nice to hear from them on how they think we're doing in each of those areas too. But Shai, I think we should also ask our judges their sense of this too, going in, like, which of these categories is the most important. Also, alternative, let's see, where are we on judges? Dave, I'm curious on this poll, are you surprised by this? Where would you weigh in on this question?
Sure. So I think it's probably no surprise that alliances and multilateralism and national security institutions kind of came in 1 and 2 there. And I think that really speaks to the fact that we need more voices in the room. I personally would have gone with national security institutions. It's also something close and dear to my heart. I think we're not lacking for great ideas in national security, and we're certainly seeing a lot of those today. What we lack are the structures and the processes, the mechanisms, and most importantly, a workforce representative of the diversity of our nation and our intellects to turn them into reality. So I'm certainly happy to see that my baby came in 2, but I'm also very happy to see that people understand that we can't do this alone.
So Cole, you work so much with the press and the media. I'm curious, do you think that our media coverage and sort of media priorities, does it align with this thinking that alliances, multilateralism are the most important? Or do you think that there is more of a focus on other areas that reflected in how the media prioritizes their coverage?
Thanks, Lauren. 2 thoughts on that. First, on the media and communications front, reacting to the 4 pitches we've received so far, so much of being a successful national security professional is not purely being the premier expert in your field, but it's your ability to persuasively and effectively communicate what your policy idea is. So hats off to the 4 contestants that have already gone. I'm just so blown away by their poise and concision in delivering those ideas. To your question about whether our media and our communications message as a nation is really reflecting what we saw here in the voting just now. It's a great question. I personally voted for the alliances and multilateralism as being the #1 priority at the moment for improving and renewing American competitiveness abroad. I don't think that carries through at the moment in the media sphere. It's so minute to minute and reacting to the news of the day that these grand strategic ideas, such as multilateralism, often get lost in the media cycle.
Great points, Cole. So, and then Carrie, I'd love to hear your reaction to this poll overall, but then also I'd love to get your sense, you spent many years in government, you are familiar with the hectic pace of senior leaders and understand how many ideas and big questions get thrown at them on a daily basis. Can you compare this competition we have today in terms of like putting these pitches forward in 2 minutes to how this environment, how that environment works in policy making when you're at the DNI, DOJ, or the White House or elsewhere?
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I think there is so much about this competition that really is related to real world. And in particular, I think the 2-minute frame, only having a couple minutes to be able to communicate, whether it's an idea or whether it's something, a situation that you are there to brief to a senior leader, only having a couple minutes to do it, maybe when they're walking from meeting to meeting, maybe when you're in the car with them driving to a briefing that they have to give to Congress. Those are the types of opportunities, particularly for a junior staff member, when there is an opportunity to communicate with a senior leader. The other thing that I noticed in our participants in this first heat was their ability to respond to the questions. It's one thing to have an idea. It's one thing to have all of your notes and be prepared to present the information that you walk into the room with. A real skill is to be able to respond on a dime, to respond to the question in a substantive way. And I think that all of our participants in the first heat were able to do that effectively.
Judges, I wish you all the best of luck in figuring out how you're going to score these participants. I think they all did incredibly well, and it would be a real toss-up to assess like which one of these came out on top. So I will leave you to your deliberations. I'm going to turn it over to Shai to get some feedback that we are hearing from the audience in terms of questions they've got for participants or just commentary that they've got in the process overall.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. The audience totally gets it. I mean, we know at CNAS when we bring an audience to an event that they get what we're all about. But wow, we're seeing amazing comments on Twitter. This is just fantastic. So I'm going to read a couple of them out. So first of all, Megan McGee writes that reacting to Tina Huang's pitch, yes, democratize data. And she tagged me especially for that. So I guess you really wanted me to read it out with enthusiasm. Jaime Vasquez, a former intern of ours at CNAS, writes, excited to hear new perspectives and ideas from the contestants competing on the pitch. And Martin Rasser, an expert in technology and security, he said that the first heat wrapped and had a strong showing. Then David I got to pronounce this correctly, Tusha writes, responding to Christine's pitch, he writes, great and timely pitch by Christine to center protections for civilians in developing military technology from the outset to address issues of misidentified combatants and civilian deaths, as well as potentially enabling friend/foe identification in frenetic battle environments. He goes on to add many aspects, including ethics, tactical, strategic considerations, moral injury, and matters of prestige, and also an understanding that the U.S. military technology by nature proliferates. We have to, and he says we have to take ownership of those effects, and he has much praise for the first round. I'm going to read another one here from the chat. Again, you can get in on the chat box at conference.cnas.org/live. And Sophie Lancel writes, alliances and multilateralism leading the polls can be reasonably explained by this presidential administration's lack of positive alliance maintenance. Okay, taking a strong shot at the executive branch there, Sophia Lancel. And then David Cannell writes, agreed, Sophia, alliances and multilateralism rely heavily on current administration and their foreign policy agendas. National institutions offer a longer-term view and subject matter expertise to advise and assist with how to engage. So we've got an amazing audience online. We've got amazing contestants coming up. Lauren, are you ready to get heat number 2 going?
Absolutely. First, I want to remind folks who are just joining us about our format here really quick. We have 4 heats throughout the day. We're about to start number 2. Every contestant, so there are 4 competitors in each heat. Every contestant will have 2 minutes to make their policy pitch about big ideas to enhance American competitiveness. Every contestant will be asked one question by our amazing panel of judges. And as Shai has been saying, we really want to hear from you in the chat or online on Twitter in terms of questions that you have for our contestants, feedback that you have, ways that you think these ideas can be strengthened and enhanced, or just cheering on all of the fantastic contestants that we have today. So for heat number 2 that we are just about ready to get started on, we've got military and defense topics. We asked these contestants what critical policy change, especially in the areas of strategy, force development, posture and presence, concepts of operations, recruitment and retention, the industrial base, or technology adoption, just a few things off the top of our heads. Which of these would have a significant effect in helping to maintain America's strategic military advantage over China and Russia? So we give DoD nearly $1 trillion a year to answer this question, and several million people that work for it. We are giving these competitors just 2 minutes to get their big idea out the door. We are totally excited to hear from Joe Aurora, Grace Kim, Leah Matchett, and Andrew Swick, who all of whom are, I believe, ready to go here in our waiting room. Shai, the catcher, is signaling a curveball. Is our first pitch ready?
Our first pitch is ready. However, I have to throw my own curveball, and that is to remind people to go check out our latest poll, which asks which actors, Congress, executive branch, industry, allies and partner nations, financial institutions, which of these will play the biggest impact in bringing any one of the pitches you hear today to life. We'll be back after this heat to talk about the results. In the meantime, do we have our first pitcher ready? Joey Aurora, can you hear me?
Hey, Shai, up and ready to go.
That's great. So if you are ready, you know how it goes. Your time begins now.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Every year, the defense industrial base is shrinking and entrepreneurship rates across the U.S. are falling. According to the Kauffman Foundation, entrepreneurship rates have fallen from 21% in 2005 to 11% in 2018. At the same time, China is increasing their influence around the world, including $5 billion of investment in US-based companies in 2019 alone. Imagine what the DoD could do to counter this influence and spur the growth of a strong industrial base and entrepreneurship by transforming how we invest existing R&D government funds and leveraging private capital. We could make tens of thousands of small bets into small companies, and then we would help them find the right fit within the DoD. Then we can make a couple thousand medium-sized bets where these companies are partnered with airmen, sailors, and soldiers to prototype solutions and bring in their best commercial expertise to help us. Then you would ask, how do we help these companies scale and get them into programs of record? A lot of those prototype projects, we have to find the companies that are truly solving end user needs, showing scientific merit, and have real private sector traction. This is where you want the government and private sector to double down on their investment and create industry-defining companies. We want more SpaceX's and Andurils and less Huawei's. So in the Air Force, we've shown that we can do this. We've invested $250 million of the SBIR funds, and we've driven over $1 billion of private capital. We've made over 1,400 non-equity based investments. 64% of those companies have never worked with the DoD before. And we have 451 prototype projects going on at this time. At the same time, we have 21 strategic level bets that we're making. So what this means is for every $1, we're getting $4 to $5 of private investment to spur technological and economic growth. We're using this right now to build new satellites, flying cars, and advanced software platforms. So let's dream big and imagine what if we could increase this investment to $10 billion a year, a fifth of the government R&D spending, and transform the way that the defense industrial base grows, leverage $50 billion of private capital, and rebuild entrepreneurship across the United States. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joey. Again, under the wire, using your 2 minutes right up into the end. Thank you so much. We are getting our next pitcher ready. Remember, we'll come back to you. You'll get a chance to expand on your idea later. We've got Grace Kim up. Grace, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We can see you. And with that, your time begins now.
Thank you. Just before I start, a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed today are my own and do not represent those of the U.S. Department of Defense. Korea's strategic geography has always made it the battleground and compass of great power rivalry. Whoever controls Korea controls Asia. The 1590s saw the Imjin Wars, the 1890s Sino-Japanese War, early 1900s Russo-Japanese War, 1940s World War II, and 1950s Korean War. In all these wars, navies, not armies, were the decisive factor for the victor. Today, South Korea remains isolated from the Asian continent and functions politically, economically, socially, and militarily as an island nation. It's dependent entirely on air and sea trade, and the demilitarized zone blocks the overland exchange of people, goods, and information. Korea has almost 500 years of maritime innovation dating back to Admiral Lee Sun-shin's turtle ships. That legacy is visible today in its development of aircraft carriers, attack submarines, and naval warplanes. But we're limiting our imagination by approaching South Korea largely as a land-based deterrent against North Korea, instead of also as a key maritime security ally against China and other threats in the Indo-Pacific. We're repeating the same mistakes of former Secretary of State Dean Acheson in 1950 when he excluded Korea from the Asia defense perimeter and thus failed to recognize Korea as a fundamental geographical building block of US maritime security strategy in the Pacific. But by reimagining South Korea as the missing link in the first island chain, the United States can better empower its ally with maritime-focused infrastructure investments, logistics, defense exports, security cooperation, and joint military exercises. This will not only enhance conventional deterrence, but create opportunities to expand the alliance relationship into new areas beyond the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. We will be back to have you chat with our judges a little bit later. Next up, we've got Leah Matchett. Leah, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, which means your time begins now.
The Cheyenne helicopter faced problems for years, but it had to physically explode in order for Congress to question whether or not it was a worthwhile investment. In an age of near-peer competition, we stand at the cusp of massive investments in defense technology. It is essential that we develop alarm bells to tell us when systems aren't working and how we can compete smarter. The most popular prescription for fixing defense acquisition is that we innovate our way out of the problem. We must build fast to fail fast. But this only works if we have a real measure of failure. In the 10 years after 2001, the DoD spent $46 billion on programs that would eventually fail after years of problems. If we had better, earlier information about projects like the F-35, we could have avoided massive inefficiencies and sunk costs. Congress already receives environmental and budgetary impact statements. Why not on military technology? In fact, there used to be an Office of Congress that did this, but in 1995, the Office of Technology Assessment was canceled in the spirit of saving money. But bad technology policy costs us far more in the long run. I propose reinstating a revised Office of Technology Assessment with a refocus on two key priorities. First, we need to create information where it is lacking. That is particularly on long-term trends in technology. Second, we need to collate the information Congress already receives. In 2017, the CRS generated 11,000 reports. Since 1980s, lobbying expenditures have gone up sixfold and the number of think tanks has doubled. If we expect Congress to make any sense of this deluge of information, it is essential that they have a trusted office within the legislative branch to help them do it. A revised Office of Technology will be affordable. The 1995 operating budget was just $22 million. It will be nonpartisan. The old office had support from senators like Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy. Most importantly, it is a military necessity. We cannot achieve a first-class military if we don't have investments where they matter the most. In the throes of a pandemic with massive international uncertainty, it is essential that we equip Congress to tell when solutions aren't working. We must recreate the Office of Technology Assessment.
Thank you, Leah. We are looking forward to hearing you interact with the judges in a little bit. We have our last pitcher of this heat coming up, Andrew Swick. Andrew, can you hear me? You're on mute.
I think I'm good now. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Great, yes.
Terrific, we can see you. So your time begins now.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Andrew, and the DoD has a funding problem. Over the past few years, I've mainly studied two things, the military and society and how they interact. We are approaching a collision. The DoD is focusing on great power competition and growing to defeat the pacing threat. In contrast, American public opinion is waning on military spending overall, and it's only getting worse over time. 68% of millennials say they disapprove of increasing military spending. These trends are only intensifying in the current crisis. COVID-19 pandemic, economic disaster, and the ongoing protests have laid bare for many Americans the need to redirect taxpayer funding to build this country. So how does the DoD tighten spending while maintaining deterrence in a period of rising uncertainty and risk of conflict? One way to thread this needle is military expansibility, saving costs by reducing the overall size of the military while maintaining the framework and capabilities to rapidly expand the force in a time of crisis. There are three main components of my approach. First is empowering the reserve component as a strategic asset to be among the first to respond to a national security crisis. The second is the creation of framework cadre units to rapidly integrate and train new recruits to mobilize. And the third is using Army Special Forces to utilize international proxy units as an offset, allowing the US to reduce its force projection overseas. Admittedly, all of these components require shifting the way we manage risk. Specifically, we used cadre units in World War II in Korea, and they faced significant initial casualties. Many of the challenges of that period will be mitigated by modern training models, but we should learn from the lessons of recent efforts like the SFABs in integrating and training individuals of varying experience and competency. But we should realize in this unprecedented time that the Washington consensus around the size of the American military is breaking, and we must find ways to meet the requirements of our common defense while accepting the moment ahead of us. Thank you again for the opportunity to work further on this, and I welcome any questions.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to pitch it back to, I love all the baseball imageries, right, Lauren? I'm going to pitch it back to my amazing co-host to take us to the judges table.
Yes, Shai, we are feeling the heat, lots of mustard on these pitches. Esteemed judges, I am so excited to hear your questions. As a reminder to folks just tuning in, every competitor is going to be asked one question by our panel of judges. I'm going to start with Carrie and then go to Dave, who in this round will ask two questions because Christine is still heading back from testimony. So Carrie, over to you for your first question.
Thank you, Lauren. Really interesting. You know, I thought it was interesting in this wave how much of a focus there was on the budget and investment. But for my first question, I am going to turn to Grace Kim, who focused on the substantive issue of South Korea and the United States' policy and how it takes into account the role of South Korea. Grace, I thought you did a terrific job of providing historical context to your presentation. My question for you is really, if the United States government was going to adopt your proposal and consider South Korea in a different manner in its policy, where would that change need to take place? In other words, as a practical matter, what would be the vehicle for the proposal that you are putting forth? Would it be the National Defense Strategy? Would it be Congress? My question is, how, as a practical matter, would your proposal be achieved?
Thank you. That's a really, really great question. And my short answer to that is everything. And every map and every iteration of when we talk about the first island chain and every conversation we have about China, about Asia, about the Indo-Pacific, this needs to be implemented. The best example I can give is, the combatant commands. When we talked about PACOM, Pacific Command, and we changed it to Indo-PACOM to take into account that Asia is more than just the Asia Pacific, but also includes the Indian Ocean. What that did is changing the name PACOM to Indo-PACOM. So even changing names, every time you have a conversation and you're projecting a map, you can see Korea is a part of the island chain. And this would be iterated in Congress, as you said, in the executive branch and all the legislative branch, because it'll just be an assumption. Just like once we always thought that the earth was flat, and then we realized it was round. And that's just an assumption that people no longer even talk about because everyone just knows. And so that's my hope with reformulating South Korea and reconceptualizing it is it's actually not even talked about anymore because it is assumed by everyone.
Grace, totally fascinating. Thank you so much. So next question, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Sure. My question is for Andrew on your proposal for increasing expansibility. This sounds like a human capital focused approach to defense. And I'm wondering how you balance that against an increasingly technological focus in the future of warfare. Can we get the right people into the right positions on short notice when war moves so quickly?
Yeah, I totally agree with that framing of the issue. And I spent a lot of time in my last position at the National Commission on Military National Public Service working on the human capital side of this. I think the balance we need to strike is we need to maintain investments in technological platforms and the sort of big defense platforms like carrier groups, for example, that provide deterrence in near-peer competition. While I think we can find the frameworks to downscale mass human capital, consolidating Army divisions, setting up framework cadre units, and relying much more on a strategic reserve to fill in the first mobilization for national security crisis, while also putting investment into the human capital of high-end skills, cyber defense, for example, language skills. As another example, we need to maintain those capabilities, but I think we can find some areas to downscale and allow to expand, especially in the Army as a force in general.
Wonderful, Andrew. Thank you so much. For the next question, I'll turn it over to Cole.
Thanks, Leah. My question is for you. As you kind of outlined, the Office of Technology Assessment closed its doors in 1995 and more or less directly led to, or as part of a series of kind of failed military modernization efforts, kind of culminating in the 2000s program of the Future Combat Systems. The military has taken steps to try to remedy this. Army Futures Command, AFWorks, DIU, similar programs to try to get themselves, as you said, to fail fast, fail early. My question for you would be, as you imagine a new revamped Office of Technology Assessment, are there other organizations, either in government or in the private sector, that you think kind of can serve as a model or have been performing their duty correctly for oversight and implementation? Is there a way that we can model an outside organization to stand up OTA again? Or just as you begin these next steps of thinking through standing up that organization, what are best practices that can be implemented to make sure that OTA is successful this time, assuming your idea would be executed, and not lead to a similar breakdown in government oversight that we saw after the closing of OTA initially?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I have a couple points on that. First of all, I think that when we're thinking about other models, I usually apply the different principles I laid out, one being the need for long-term technological analysis and one being the need to collate existing information. I think we can draw those from different models. So lots of think tanks do kind of overview scientific information right now. The problem is that information isn't being accepted, absorbed by congressmen. They're getting so much from different think tanks, from lobbyists, and everyone has a different scientific opinion. If we can have a trusted office, and this was an original purpose of the OTA, but I think if you look at organizations like the AAAS, the FAS, all of them are about bringing scientists in, the Bulletin of the Atomic, and they do a good job of bringing technical experts to policy debates. So I think using that model, but couching it in a specifically nonpartisan framework, which the OTA really grew into in the 80s. On the kind of long-term horizon trends, Oxford has a Future of Humanity project that is specifically supposed to be about how do we think about these long-term technological trends. I think we could draw on them. There's the Bulletin of the Atomic also kind of does this horizon work. And I think we could draw on some of that. But again, this only is useful information if it's concise, if it's timely, and if it's taking place in a place where it's got a lot of trust from Congress. And I think that's why we need to couch the Office of Technology Assessment again within Congress.
All right, Leah, thank you. That was wonderful. For our final question, I will turn once more to Dave.
Great. My question is for Joseph. So how do you aim to distinguish and deconflict this proposal from existing investment vehicles in the government? What relationship would this future entity or project have to organizations like AFWorks, Futures Command, and DIU?
Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I'm one of the co-founders of AFWorks. And so the proposal that we're leveraging is saying actually take the model that exists through AFWorks and actually scale it out for all of government. There's about $3 billion of SBIR funds across all of government and about a couple billion or $1.5 billion for DoD alone. So we want to scale this out to bring in the most amount of prototype projects. And we could look at partnering with other federal agencies to pull together their R&D funding and execute this model. Does that answer your question?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, judges, thank you so much for your fantastic questions. Heat 2, you definitely lit a spark of interest in our judges and in our audience. So congratulations on your fantastic pitches. Wonderful job, everyone. Shai, before you are totally overcome by the heat of all of those pitches, I wanted to check in with you to see how our audience is doing. First, we had that poll in the last round asking about which actors would play an important role in bringing these ideas to life. Have we heard back from our audience on where that stands?
Well, as I think you probably wouldn't be surprised, Congress and the executive branch really took the lead in terms of where our audience votes went. Congress came in with 41%. The executive branch was 34%. I'm wondering if that means people think that there is a need to fix these problems with legislative work, or if more so there's a sense that Congress just needs to be more active on these issues. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about Congress. What do you think the reasoning behind that push to Congress playing a role?
I think there has been an appetite over the last several years for Congress to be far more active in national security and foreign policy. And we've really seen a sea change for that, particularly in this last Congress, with that had a lot of national security and military veterans come on board. But I think it also really opened the doors for Congress to say, we want to put our thumb on the scale in terms of executive branch policymaking, but we also want to be able to introduce our own ideas and in some cases shape the execution of ideas that the executive branch is pursuing. We saw that in terms of how let's see, the war powers resolution for Yemen and Iran. We see that in sanctions. We see that with their increasing interest in national security innovation. I think it's a lot of it is an appetite. It's a recognition that they have sort of opened that door and maybe begging them to do quite a bit more in that space. I'll also note, I'm just fascinated to see in our last question, we had alliances and multilateralism up at the top in terms of the ideas that people thought were going to be the most important. But in terms of partners, we don't see we see allies and partners so further down in the mix. So I think maybe that's a recognition that our alliances are out of date, that we need to be focused on more modern challenges, and that we are not able to rely on allies and partners in a way that we would want to in terms of our national security policy development, and also in innovating new ways to address national security challenges in the 21st century. So that's excuse me. Those are some really interesting results. Shai, I also would wonder, do we want to turn it over to our judges to see what their reactions were?
Well, while the judges digest the poll, I do want to read a couple of comments from the audience. So judges, think about the poll, think about your analysis. Adam, we've had, one of the best things about being a part of the pitch is we've got to spend a lot of time getting to know these contestants in prep sessions and through reading their pitches and watching their pitches. And they've really come out to show support for each other today. And in particular, Adam Dietrich, who's coming a little bit later today, he said, okay, round 2 so far has been, and then he just put the flame emoji, which I think, again, not being that hip, I think that's a good thing. And then Drake Long came in and he talked about how everyone in round 2 did great work. So it's great to see our pitch contestants playing along. We had a specific reaction to Grace Kim's idea from Amanda Suarez in the chat. Amanda said, really compelling idea to reimagine our partnership with South Korea as a maritime alliance, apologies. Keep the responses coming, keeping engaged in the chat. And remember, later today, audience, you're going to pick the people's choice. And now I think it's a great time to go back to our judges. Judges, what did you make of the poll results?
So let's start with Carrie.
Oh, sorry, with Carrie. Sorry, I was just throwing it out to all of the judges. We can call that a wild pitch, maybe.
Great. Thanks, Shai and Lauren. Well, this will come as no surprise, especially to Lauren, that I am really bolstered and encouraged by the fact that Congress came out on top of our poll. I know there's a lot going on in Congress today. There's a lot of hearings going on, but I wonder if we've got some congressional staffers also watching the pitch and weighing in on these poll results, because it demonstrates that there really is some confidence in Congress engaging on these issues. And given that in Heat 2, so many of the participants really focused on budget authority and creating new institutions that would, or in reinvigorating institutions, all of that takes money, and all of the allocation of money requires Congress to play an active role. So I'm really intrigued and delighted to see that part of our poll result.
Dave, you spent some time. Sorry, I was just muted, unmuted, and muted again. I think I'm here. So I wanted to ask Dave, you spent some time working with the Cyber Solarium, how to focus on the Hill. You spent some time in the executive branch and elsewhere. Like, what was your reaction to the poll?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to have a bit of experience on both sides of the issue when it comes to executive and Congress, and I was personally having trouble choosing between the two, but I at least appreciate that people recognize the important role Congress can play. You can't do any of this without authorization, of course, and you can't do any of this without money. And I think, of course, Congress holds the purse strings there. I also think that both the Congress and the executive branch have a role to play in advocacy for these sorts of ideas, and also in clearing away obstacles that get in the way. And then finally, once ideas are being executed, Congress has a responsibility to provide oversight. In the bigger picture of actually financing these programs and making sure they happen, it's just so important to make sure that we can have a slightly more direct line to the people that comes through their elected representatives in Congress.
Cole, we've spent a lot of time over the last week working with the contestants to give them advice on how to condense all this information into 2 minutes and how to do effective presentations. You spend so much time with our CNES staff so generously to help us similarly. What's your reaction? Like, how hard is it to do this, to get all of these incredible ideas in the short period of time? And what kind of feedback did you think was most resonant that we gave our contestants over the last week to help them think through how to make these pitches most effectively?
Absolutely. As much as I enjoy being here, listening and being able to judge, I'm taking notes, just trying to learn and keep up with some of these incredible ideas. I'm just blown away with not just the clarity with which the contestants are able to pitch their ideas, but the depth and the research and the practicality really of these ideas. This is not, let's establish a colony on Mars. These are immediate actionable policy ideas, and so it's I've got pages of notes here already that I'll be researching later. On that front, I think huge hats off again to the contestants for doing this preparation. Over the last week we were talking with them and kind of sharing best practices for especially in this digital environment right now where we are stuck at home from the pandemic, trying to figure out the best way to deliver a message and communicate that clearly. And that all comes down to meeting your audience where they are, just understanding the background and the focus of the audience that you're trying to connect with. And I think they're doing a fantastic job of that so far, both understanding that most of the audience watching this today, they are national security professionals, or at least well versed in the goings on of foreign policy and government. And so being able to balance that with this panel of judges, I think is very admirable and impressive. I think a theme here from Heat 2, if you don't mind me pivoting for 1 second, a theme here that I noticed was this recognition that we need to partner the government, especially the Defense Department, military institutions, with private sector, and understanding that partnerships with industry are so critical to moving our national objectives forward. Dave, I'm actually going to pivot to you for a second. You wrote this fascinating article about a year ago that you titled "The Second Battle of Midway," which we were happy to publish through CNAS, and I admit that I try to do my best to learn from it and understand it. In the piece, you essentially put yourself in the situation of it's 2025 and a Chinese amphibious action group has set out for Taiwan, and how does the U.S. Intervene to stop this effort? And a critical part of that was leveraging all these different vectors of U.S. strength, from technology to institutions to just hardware. Going off of the theme that we just talked through in the second session, and tying that back to your piece from a year ago, what would be your impression from the statements that these pitches that we just heard from? How would that tie into your idea of the U.S. Second Battle of Midway?
Sure, that's a great question. I think what comes to mind first is probably Joseph's proposal to find ways to get more startup money coming out of the government to support great ideas. Some of the things that I had in that article, for example, constellations of small satellites, are ideas that have been refined by corporations in Silicon Valley. The other thing I think that's going to be important to implement those sorts of ideas and implement a lot of the ideas here is to tear down some of those barriers between the national security community and the public. While a lot of us have been seeking these issues for a long time, we have to remember that the incumbent generation in a lot of our major technological cities like Silicon Valley and New York, Boston, Austin, are young people who grew up, and a lot of their conception of American national security is Abu Ghraib, is drone warfare, is warrantless wiretapping. And there's not a high level of trust between our community and theirs. And we have to do what we can to show them that we, like them, are people who care about this country, and we like them are people who have values that often align with theirs, and that there's a lot we can do to help one another.
Dave, I love that impression from you in your last answer. To me, I mean, I spend a lot of time teaching and talking about national security. And to me, the relationships are such, and perceptions and misperceptions are such an important part of our policymaking that doesn't get enough attention, whether it be civil military relations, which is a big focus of mine, but also those dynamics between industry and the executive branch, where there are just so many rules in terms of what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do, that people forget about, focusing on our overall objectives and understanding what it is that we're supposed to be, why we're supposed to be here. They also, I think, as to your point, they so often forget, like, what are all the big moments in people's minds for what national security means to them. And if we don't have conversations about where we've gone wrong in the past and what our goals are in the future, I think people will have a really hard time moving beyond them. We've got a few minutes before we move on to our next segment. So we want to come back to the judges on one more question, then also introduce Christine. One question I'd love to hear from all of you guys on is, as we said at the beginning, all of these pitches are only 2 minutes long. In implementation, realistically, they would have required dozens of meetings and memos and lawyer reviews and briefings to the Hill and so on. There's a lot of follow-on work that would be associated with. So I'm just curious, like, which one that you've heard so far, separate from your judging, would you want to spend time working on if you could go back into government today? Which one would most excite you to jump into if you had the opportunity to do any one of the 8 pitches that we've heard so far? Carrie, can we start with you? Sorry to blindside you, but I think this is a fascinating question to get into.
Sure. I'm looking back through my notes over the first 2 panels. I have to say that from I teach cybersecurity law and policy at Georgetown Law, and so some of the proposals that pertain to cybersecurity caught my eye. I was particularly interested in Tina's presentation, which was in the first heat, which focused on this concept of creating a national cloud to try to lower the barriers for entry for AI. And so I think that is interesting because that proposal, there are cybersecurity elements to it that would need to be considered. And in the area which, Lauren and Shai, the area that I work on, which is so much at the intersection of national security and law and technology, I think her proposal really fit right into that suite of issues. And so I could definitely see it as something that not only I, but many in my peer community would be intrigued by.
Not Cole, I just went to Cole. Dave, what about you? If you, when you inevitably go back to be Deputy Secretary of Defense or Secretary of Defense one day, which one of these issues would you be so thrilled to pick up and run with if you got back in a role in government?
I'd be really interested in the idea from Alan regarding cybersecurity for the academic community. I used to work on the Cyber Solarium Commission most recently, and we often lose sleep because of the jobs we do, but I think working on that commission probably messed up my sleep more than any other. So I spent a lot of time worrying about cybersecurity, more so than I did in years past. And I think it's really important to find incentives to get people on board. Our cybersecurity, from the individual level to the organizational level to the national level, are all connected. And we need to find the incentives we can to make people develop the right habits. And it starts with, frankly, financial incentives, which I think Alan kind of summed up really nicely with his program of grants. So I really look forward to trying to talk on something like that.
Love it. Cole, what about you? You, at some point in time, I'm sure will be running all of our lives when you go into government someday. Which one of these would you be so excited to pick up and run with when you start serving someday?
Yeah, absolutely. The pitches and heat number 2 really stood out to me for a number of reasons, but I think Andrew Swick's explanation of scalability within the military, and especially kind of taking another look at how we use a reserve component of the military as a National Guardsman. So often the National Guard is asked to play many different roles, from civil support to supporting active duty forces overseas, and just kind of re-examining what that what that mission set looks like for the reserve component, I think is long overdue. And I really appreciated Andrew's practical breakdown of that being one step in the U.S. military reassessing how it scales its forces.
Shai, I want to offer a surprise question for you.
I love surprises. I love
yeah,
surprises.
so, I
This
mean,
whole day is all about the live excitement and surprises, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, you have been behind the podium before at the State Department and in other roles to be able to go out and sell the press on what is the next big hotness in American foreign policy. So if you tomorrow, if I stuck you back at the State Department and you're there in front of the absolutely rabid, amazing State Department press corps, which one of these would you be really excited to develop and answer questions on, and have the AP just like tear into, and so you could be there to defend this big idea next?
So I think, what's really fun about being a spokesperson and working in communications in the government is you have to know a little bit about everything so you can get out there and explain and communicate it. And for me, that means when you watch these very complex pitches with these brilliant speakers, I mean, really every single one of these pitchers have been fantastic. Uh, I look for the one in which I can walk away with a few really clear bullets that I can go out and I can explain and get excited and passionate about. And then when the difficult questions get beyond my depth, I know that there is an expert that can go and speak their language really well. And for me, Leah Matchett's proposal about, I don't remember the name of the office, but recreating this office of innovation. I thought that was a bold choice because here what she's doing is she's recognizing a problem in terms of the need and the desperate need to constantly innovate, but going back to the source material and upgrading something that's already existed. I'm a big Star Wars fan and I loved The Force Awakens. And one of the reasons why I love The Force Awakens is it was new and it involved taking from the old and respecting the past. And for me, Leah's idea really got to me on that level, on that like Jedi level. And so for me, if I was going to go to the podium, that is the one that I would be up defending. But again, they were all fantastic.
Yes. If you are just tuning in now, we just wrapped up Heat 2, which was an incredible round of 4 more pitches on military and defense issues. We had our first round on economy and technology. We'll be we got a few more minutes before we head into our Heat 3. If you are not following along on Twitter, please do so. We've got our hashtag 2020. We would love to hear from you in terms of comments and questions and cheering on of all of our contestants. Our website at conference.cnes.org has more on the event, and really importantly, it's got the incredible bios of all the contestants and the really amazing backgrounds they bring to their pitches today. We've heard from a few more folks that we've got feedback from on terms of the latest pitches, but Shai, I think I would like to actually tee up the next poll if we can get that started. What is the next thing that we want to hear from our audience on for our polling system?
Absolutely. This one is, I think, both a little bit scary, but also going to be a lot of fun. I think the audience members, you've been so fantastic. You've been voting, you've been chatting. Channel your inner pessimist, your inner Simon Cowell, and answer for us right on the conference.cnas.org webpage. On the right side of the screen, there's a little check mark. Just click that tab. You'll see all the answers, all the choices. What would you say is the biggest obstacle to policy change in the defense space? So again, let's put on your pessimistic hat. Is it bureaucracy? Is it budget? Is it Congress? Is it civil military relations? Is it just plain old inertia? Or is it some other thing? And if you pick other, please give us your answer in the chat or on Twitter, and we will read it out. Before we get to our next heat, I've got a couple more awesome comments from people in the chat and on Twitter to read. Joan Eleanor in the chat writes, loved all the focus on smarter investment in DoD spending. And that reminds me that coming up later today, after the fourth heat, as we are tabulating the final results, we will have the world premiere of a CNAS explainer video called The Bottom Line, featuring none other than the director of our defense program, Susanna Bloom, breaking down strategy and the defense budget. So everybody stay tuned. Later today, we're going to have that premiere. Joan, Eleanor, I bet you're especially going to like it because Susanna is all about using smart strategy to guide the way we spend on defense. Lauren, with that, I got to know, which of these pitches would you worked in the National Security Council, if you were in a principals committee and one of these pitches came to you, which is the one that you would see unanimous support for right away?
Well, so I'm gonna echo you a little bit for a different reason, and that is so I think that the Office of Technology Assessment proposal to reinvigorate this is absolutely crucial for a number of reasons, for all the ones that were articulated in the pitch and what you did. But I have seen too many times where members of the Principals Committee and the National Security Council have sat down to make a vital national security decision related to technology, and they don't understand that technology at all. In fact, people around the table may even not use email. They're not too certain about how their cell phone works. And yet we're turning to them to make crucial decisions on artificial intelligence, on emerging technologies, on encryption and other issues that they need broken down for them in tiny bite-sized increments. And that's fair. A lot of these issues are really complicated, but we need to have experts who can help policymakers with these issues, to help educate them, to get them up to speed, and then also be there as resources that are unbiased. So many of our tech experts that we turn to today are associated with industry, we have an incredible innovation base in this country, but we need to also have within our own government expertise that can offer this analysis to support really complex policy decision making, both on the Hill as well as in the executive branch. And I will just share a short aside that I won't say the issue, but we finally decided to explain a really complicated technical issue to the Principals Committee using a comic strip, because it was just the only way we were going to be able to be clear with them about, here's how this actually works. I'm not sure if they still got it, but I guess it was better than a 40-page briefing, 40-page briefing paper. We're going to get started with our Heat 3 in a few minutes, but as a reminder to everybody, we're between Heat 2 and Heat 3. If you are having any problems logging into our chat function or otherwise, there's a lot of there's a lot of discussion on Twitter under @CNASDC to give people feedback on which system to use, different troubleshooting, other things like that. You can always follow us along on YouTube, or we've also taken a lot of comments on Twitter at #CNAS2020. We want to hear from all of you. I think we're going to take just a quick few minutes breaks to let Shai and I get some water and come back to guide this next Heat 3. But I want to say again, thanks to all of our amazing contestants and our round of judges. We'll be coming back in just a second to start our Heat number 3.
All right, welcome back to the pitch. Thank you. We took a short break there because you know what? This is a long day. It's a live show. Anything can happen. We've had voting, we've had polling, we've had comments from Twitter and from the chat. Again, if you want to participate in all of the action, hashtag CNAS 2020, or go to the conference website. That's conference.cnas.org/live. And right there on the side, you'll see a chat box and a Twitter roll and our polls. And if you missed it, our poll we asked right before the break that we'll be talking about a little bit later is, what would you say is the biggest obstacle to policy change in the defense space? Bureaucracy, budget, Congress, civil military relations, inertia, or your own idea? And if you have your own idea, please drop it in the chat. We've had so many great pitches so far, and we have more to come. Lauren, what's your reaction so far? We were working on this many, many months ago. How do you feel about the pitch at the halfway mark?
First of all, I can't believe that we are halfway done with this competition. Like you said, I remember talking about this 6 months ago, and I think we're all had a momentary thought of like, this can't possibly work. This isn't actually going to, we're not going to generate the ideas that we want. We're not going to get the community that we want. And wow, if I had any doubts, I was totally wrong. The ideas have been incredible. The feedback has been remarkable. And just the support from everyone at CNAS and everybody that is online today has been just a great part of this community that we want to build. I'm also just been so thrilled by the judges and the really engaged questions that they're offering and the support that they're giving the competitors today. Just a couple of reminders for everybody as he was jumping in for heat number 3. We are doing 4 heats today. Every heat has 4 competitors. They each get 2 minutes to make their pitch of their big idea to enhance American competitiveness. Our judges are assessing them on the ingenuity of the idea, the practicality, the academic rigor, and the clarity of the presentation. We are not judging people on their internet connection, their background, whether or not their pets or their kids show up, none of the above, but just on those factors. But if you have views of the audience, remember to stick around for the end of the competition because we will be asking you to weigh in on the people's choice. So I think we are ready to start up with heat 3, which is going to be focused on a topic of a lot of conversation today, alliances and multilateralism. We asked these contestants to have their best policy ideas on what the United States can do to strengthen and better leverage its alliances or international institutions to advance U.S. vital interests and renew American competitiveness. Many of as we said earlier today, a lot of our alliances and institutions are decades old, if not older, and centered around challenges that are no longer relevant to our interests anymore. And I think we see a lot of bad reaction to these alliances. Why are we still a part of them? Is it still relevant as a result of that? So the UN and NATO and some of our other institutions we're a part of, they give member states 3 days to articulate their policy concerns about new ideas or to give feedback on things. We are instead going to give these contestants 2 minutes to make their pitch. And we are really excited to hear from Jacopo Spalasi, Kyle Easton, Drake Long, and Adam Weinstein is our next set of contestants. Shai, is our first pitch ready?
I believe our first pitch is ready. Yakovos, can you hear me?
I sure can.
That's great. Thanks for being. Can you see us? We can see you?
Yep, absolutely.
Terrific. So you know how it goes. Your time begins now.
I am proposing an initiative led by the State Department in African partner nations, which seeks to connect actors in government and across civil society to create more productive, mutually beneficial partnerships, not only for the government, but for citizens as well. To accomplish this, the State Department will use its network in Africa and the United States to bring together government officials and citizens in summits and other forums to discuss various fields and issues, to promote shared experiences and exchanges of knowledge. The scope here is virtually unlimited. We should strive to connect business leaders, students, lawyers, activists, religious leaders, and much more. We have a great deal in common and shared experiences with our African partners that current US policy is simply not leveraging. Now, I am not arguing that the United States needs to change its interests. I am arguing that it needs to create new tools and pathways to achieve them. This is a reimagination of how US partnerships operate. By maximizing this sort of soft power, the United States can reinvigorate its competitiveness, strengthen existing partnerships, and achieve better outcomes generally. Entering a renewed era of great power and gray zone competition, it is the United States not only needs friendly governments, but partners in civil society, and to create opportunities for citizens to establish organic private partnerships. This initiative seeks these ends and can be applied to other regions of the globe. This has the potential to become a flagship program and hallmark of US foreign policy in the 21st century and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Yakovos. Thank you so much. And let's bring up our next contestant, Kyle Easton. Kyle, can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Can you see us?
I can.
All right. We can see you. And I see you're going for the Room Raider Award with the space-based background. But since we've done our tech check, we are, you'll get the cue in a moment. Your time begins now.
One of the most pressing problems facing the US alliance system today is that it lacks a comprehensive strategy and clear purpose for existing in the post-Cold War era. My proposed solution to this problem is that the US alliance system should be future-oriented in its strategy and focused on the development and enforcement of global rules and norms that are rooted in shared values. Frontier domains, such as space, the Arctic, the deep sea bed, among others, present a current and future-oriented challenge as they lack established and enforceable rules and norms. The US alliance system should lead in this effort and make it their core purpose. So why frontier domains? First, frontier domains such as space and the Arctic are increasingly important because of their political, economic, security, and environmental implications. These are currently contested areas due to the multiple nations' reliance on them. Frontier domains are expected to increase in competition as people and nations expand and deepen their reliance on the systems and economies based in them. Second, development of frontier domains is often expensive. A more unified US allied cooperative effort would help with burden sharing in terms of cost and resources. So how would this work? Taking the space domain as an example, I would recommend the US take the following 3 steps. First, clarify a national vision and strategy for space activities rooted in US values and recognizing the inherent international nature of the space domain. Such values would include sustainable and responsible development and engagement in space. Second, create a body that brings together government officials, subject matter experts, and private sector representatives from allied nations to develop a unified vision, mission, and strategy for engagement in space. Third, develop a comprehensive approach to tackle pressing domain-specific issues. By taking these steps, the US and its allies can lead the way in setting a positive vision for the responsible development and exploration of these exciting, challenging, and important domains. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. All right, on to our next pitcher. Lauren, everyone is, we always have cushion and stuff like that for timing, but wow, all of our pitchers have been on top of these rules, and I got to give them a lot of credit for that. So we're going to bring up our next pitcher, Drake Long. Drake, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. We can see you. So that means your time begins now.
Okay. I think there's a sense of fatalism about the US's ability to work multilaterally in Southeast Asia, mostly because we can't reach consensus on things like the South China Sea. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is meeting on the South China Sea right now, and they're probably not going to reach consensus either. But look, the best multilateral alliances always start very humble and very functional. The Quad was a disaster relief organization, and then it fell apart, but now it's back. I believe that we laid the basis for a functional multilateral institution in Southeast Asia a long time ago with the Maritime Security Initiative. The Maritime Security Initiative was built to provide capacity to Southeast Asian countries facing pressure campaigns by China in the South China Sea. But now it's ballooned past that. It covers the Indian Ocean, it covers the South Pacific. It's kind of lost focus, and it was never really focused on navies or coast guards in particular. My proposal, we should retool the MSI or retool our security systems programs to be the foundation for an operational Coast Guard presence and an informal Coast Guard alliance aimed at pushing back on China in the South China Sea, but explicitly focused on maritime security. We can do that by using new technology. The Maritime Security Initiative does not necessarily have to give out UAVs, doesn't have to give out ships. We can give out remote sensing tools, a suite of remote sensing tools, actually. Recyclable rockets and nanosatellites have made remote sensing and satellite imagery so cheap. If you take a couple remote sensing tools like synthetic aperture radar, an analytics platform, put it all together, put it into one information fusion center for US allies, and Southeast Asian countries that are interested, then you have one complete operating picture. I think this could be the basis for a very robust multilateral alliance in Southeast Asia. And I think it's something that the USA should really consider putting together. One giant maritime information alliance. Thank you. That's my pitch.
Thank you so much, Drake. Now going on to our final pitch of this heat, over to Adam Weinstein. Adam, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for having me.
All right, and we can see you. I think we go to the same background store. Again, we are not rating on backgrounds, but I like yours. Looks a lot like mine. With that, your time begins now.
My proposal is to negotiate a qualified industrial zone between the US, Afghanistan, and Pakistan that is inspired by the 2003 Middle East Free Trade Area Initiative. It will offer duty-free entry of most goods that include originating components of labor or the actual raw materials from both countries. Some Afghan and Pakistani products already benefit from the generalized system of preferences, but this idea goes a step further. It increases US-Pakistan trade without providing a traditional free trade agreement just yet. We'll keep that as a carrot. It promotes improved relations between Islamabad and Kabul at a critical time. It encourages Afghan exports to Pakistan and the US to address the dismal state of Afghanistan's high import to export ratio. For example, Afghan exports earnings equal about 1/17 of all imports. It promotes cooperation in the private sectors and incentivizes a connected border area. It encourages a more developed system of cross-border payments, business visas, and transactional documentation because they'll need to produce those to qualify for the QIZ. It offers a conditional boost to Afghanistan and Pakistan's international profiles. It positions the US to benefit politically from CPEC's logistics if it succeeds, or as an alternative model of development if CPEC fails. And most importantly, it offers a model for a future QIZ or transit agreement between Pakistan and India if relations improve. So it's essentially a new application of an existing idea that would produce tangible and quantifiable results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Okay, wow. There are some really detailed pitches in this particular heat. And judging by how our audience has been so interested in multilateralism and alliances, Lauren, I am really excited to see how our pitchers do on the hot seat.
I would say that all of our judges have got their work cut out for them. In terms of pitches, I would say the bottom dropped out of all of those. I don't know a lot about baseball, but I know that's probably good. Apparently that means a curveball. Not really sure. I'm learning along with everybody else today. As a reminder, we're going to turn it over to our judges now. Each contestant gets one question, but before we get started, we have one additional judge joining us who as I said earlier, was on the Hill testifying. Christine Lee is an associate fellow here at CNAS in our Asia Pacific program. She was also one of the Bacevich Award winners in 2019 in our 2019 annual conference. So we're delighted to have her join our panel of judges with Carrie, Dave, and Cole. So I'm actually going to start with, let's see, I'll start with Carrie this time for your question to go first, and then I'll go to Christine after that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lauren. Boy, what a change in this heat from our prior heats. I mean, a really different focus. Really excited to hear the focus on alliances and multilateralism, and a real variety amongst the four presenters just now. My question is for Yakovos. First of all, Yakovos, I am just delighted that you chose Africa and alliances with Africa and different African countries, and just teed up that issue in this conference and in this activity that we're doing here today, because it is not a region of the world that often is top of national security policy discussions in the think tank community. And so I'm really welcome your focus on that issue and how to build more State Department partnerships with African nations. My question to you really has to do with what generated that proposal from you. Is there something in your professional experience or in the academic work that you have done that generated your interest in making this proposal here today?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts and kind words. What generated my idea was a lot of different things. On one level, I've studied Africa for a number of years and in undergrad, and in a lot of classes, professors start the semester by asking students to highlight concepts that they think of when they first hear Africa. And often the first thing you hear are negative terms: conflict, poverty, terrorism. And those things certainly characterize many parts of Africa, but I was concerned that these are negative connotations, and interested in how can we sort of change that. And secondly, I asked the question, how can the United States strengthen partnerships beyond the traditional scope of the traditional defense arrangements and trade agreements? And my answer, and the answer of this program, is through citizens, by putting citizens together and making that a hallmark of US foreign policy rather than something encouraged on sidelines.
Thanks so much, guys. I just want to remind everybody who is just now joining us that if you are interested in giving feedback or asking questions to our amazing contestants, if you can just weigh in with the hashtag CNAS 2020. We've also got a chat room if you are logged in on our conference website at conference.cnas.org. You can weigh in either case to either cheer people along, ask questions, offer commentary on how to do the implementation of these amazing ideas, or just otherwise cheer Shai and I along, because we love the feedback as well. As I mentioned, we've got one more judge who just joined us. So Christine, I'll turn it over to you for your first question of the day. Welcome.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks so much to all of our contestants. I apologize for joining a little bit late here. I was actually just testifying on the Hill on the United Nations, so it's very befitting that I'm joining this particular heat first. And congratulations to all of you on your excellent ideas. Just had a quick question for Drake. First of all, I think your focus on Southeast Asia is really important, and the Maritime Security Initiative is one that having traveled to the region, I think would be very well received by most, if not all, of the countries that we work with in the region. Curious if you're thinking about sort of China's coercive actions against individual Southeast Asian countries, and how you would sort of encourage countries that are reluctant to sign on to these types of initiatives for fear of retribution from China, how you would provide the proper incentives. And also, I guess, on the narrative shaping side, how would you frame the initiative such that it's not framed as in the context of US-China strategic competition, but something that's a positive initiative for our allies and partners in the region. So thanks, Drake.
So to that, I would actually say that explicitly, you do not say it is focused on China, because it really isn't. Maritime security is a whole number of challenges. It's the most important thing, I think, in Southeast Asia. There's numerous transnational issues that can only be solved through better maritime security efforts. And you actually see this growth of coast guards in Southeast Asia in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and what have you. That shows that they're more worried about that. So if we start this initiative, we don't say it's about China, because it's really not about China. It's not specifically about China. We can focus it on things like anti-piracy, which is a growing problem in the region. We can focus it on things like the marine economy. Consider the fact that most of these countries are net seafood importers. A lot of the coastal communities rely on fishing stocks to get by. Who enforces laws against illegal fishing? It's the coast guards, but you need to be able to see things in order to enforce them properly. The main issue in Southeast Asia is just a lack of maritime domain awareness. So you sell this campaign by saying this is about maritime domain awareness. It's about maritime security threats like piracy, illegal fishing first. And then, implicitly, just by happenstance, it also happens to detect Chinese Coast Guard ships and maritime militia ships operating illegally in the South China Sea. So it has an added benefit to it. I think that's honestly the track that most effective multilateral initiatives go on. They start out humble, and then they kind of escalate to something that just seems indispensable. So that's how I would actually sell it. I would say explicitly, not about China. Implicitly, kind of helps push back a little bit.
Great, thanks, Drake. I'm sold.
Drake, Christine, thanks so much. Next question goes to Dave.
Hi, my question is for Kyle. Really loved your idea about competitiveness, particularly as a space nerd myself. I'm all about finding ways to get more people involved in the space domain. My question is with respect to how we actually go about bringing on partners and allies who might have fewer resources to actually access these domains. What comes to mind for me is how do we get countries that don't have space launch capability, for example, more involved in space? How do we get countries that don't have geographic proximity to the Arctic or ice-breaking ships involved? What sorts of steps did you take to get those sorts of nations into and then available to join us in securing these domains?
Great, thank you for your question, Dave. So I think initially I would take different phases to this. So again, if we're going to continue with the space as a case study, initially probably focusing on working with shaping this vision and larger strategy with other allied space power nations. So Canada, Japan immediately come to mind, the European Space Administration and so forth. Secondly, in terms of working with partners, so whether they be other allies who are developing their space capabilities, like South Korea's CASI, or non-allies, but potential partners like India's ISRO. I believe that there's a lot of room that comes from a unified body with a very clear core kind of mission and vision for space exploration to continue some programs that they're already engaging in, right? That's education, tech transfer kind of engagements, training and whatnot for space situational awareness, and so forth. So I think that's one of the roles of many that a body like this could kind of play with developing nations that are lacking certain capabilities.
Kyle, thanks so much and love your background. As a reminder to folks tuning in, you can weigh in at #CNES2020 or in our chat room on our video stream. We would love to hear from you for questions from the audience, any feedback, or any ideas for new backgrounds that Shai and I should have in our next round. Last question goes to Cole.
Thanks, Lauren. Adam, my question is for you. You argue that the U.S. should establish a free trade agreement with Pakistan and offer a clause allowing a duty-free entry agreement with Afghanistan. My question is, if the U.S. fails to do this, or if it fails to step into a leadership role in this relationship, if it cedes its leadership on this front, who benefits? You mentioned a model for Pakistan, India, QIZ. And so I'd just be interested to hear, if the U.S. does not step up in this moment, who fills that void?
Well, first, I'd like to say, since my initial proposal, as I developed it more, I stepped back, I walked back from the full FTA. Afghan and Pakistani goods already do enjoy some duty-free preferences. An FTA would apply to everything. I walked back from that because I think it's important to keep that as a carrot. And that's why I mentioned a qualified industrial zone that would, require cooperation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. For example, perhaps granite that's exported, the raw materials of granite that's exported from Afghanistan to Pakistan would be finished in Pakistan, and that good would qualify as a result. If we don't step in this role, looking at the big picture and stepping away from the sort of technicalities of trade agreements, if we don't maintain a foot in South Asia, I think the clear beneficiary is China. And I think the other beneficiaries are political forces in both India and Pakistan that want to see a continuation of hostilities for their own political gain. And Pakistan views Afghanistan as a place of strategic depth for New Delhi. And I think everyone here probably knows Pakistan's history of meddling in Afghan affairs. And certainly the insecurity in Afghanistan has impacted Pakistan's own security, and Pakistan has paid a high price in terms of lives as well. So the US can play a constructive role without, apart from US aid, apart from military, military goals, through trade, through facilitating trade, through encouraging the private sector to develop on its own, organically, by creating incentives. But if we don't do that, then China leads the way, and the Chinese loans that are being given out in South Asia are they're not positive in the long term. I think China has done some positive things for actual development in terms of roads and making sure that the electrical grid stays running. But I think we have to offer an alternative model that can work with the Chinese model, but also when there's aligned, when goals are aligned, but also shows the shortcomings of the Chinese model and offers a better alternative. And like I said, besides the Chinese benefiting from us stepping away from South Asia, political forces in India and Pakistan that want to see hostilities between two nuclear powers continue will also benefit. And that's a very dangerous game to play. Thank you.
Well, Yakovos, Kyle, Drake, and Adam, I was so excited to hear all of your pitches. To make another terrible pun after this round, I can't stand it. I have got to get out of the kitchen with this heat. You guys did an incredible job. So congrats on your amazing pitches. We will come back to all of you later on. Judges, I am not sure how you're going to be able to weigh in on this. That you guys had some really complex, intricate, and fascinating ideas coming at us in this set of pitches. As a reminder to folks in the audience, we're asking judges to weigh in on the ingenuity of the idea, the practicality, the academic rigor, and the clarity of presentation. And they'll be offering a scorecard to pick 4 finalists that Michelle Fournoy and Mike Zach, our distinguished judges, will pick for the best in show at the end of the day. But don't worry, everyone in the audience, you'll get a chance to weigh in after the final heat in order to pick the best in show. But speaking of audience, Shai, I wanted to see if we had the results of our last poll in, which was asking about barriers to innovation and policymaking at the Department of Defense, my old home. And I'd be curious to see, how did the audience weigh in on that question?
Well, we do have those results, and this is our last poll we're going to have before the People's Choice, which I think you were referencing before. The audience, you have been phenomenal. There's so many great comments. I hope we get to read some more later. They're like filling up. It's incredible. But also, there's been tremendous engagement in our poll from the hundreds of folks that are watching online. It's really interesting to see, but the two, by a long margin, bureaucracy and inertia, both with 37% each, were viewed as the biggest obstacles to policy change in defense space. Now, I'm a former civil servant from the U.S. Department of State. You're a former civil servant from the Department of Defense. How do you feel about bureaucracy and inertia being viewed as the top obstacles to change?
Well, so in some ways, that's a big frustration because, coming from bureaucracy, I see it as such a tremendous tool for American leadership. On the other hand, I have to say that the point of bureaucracy, the point of our institutions that serve as part of this Department of State, Department of Defense, National Security Council, and others, is to be that stable reference point, the gears, the engine room, the people that are helping you get your big ideas done. And leaders come in and quite often don't appreciate that that is the objective, and they expect to have either the bureaucracy act as their own kind of political appointees, or expect them to serve as true barriers to change. I think if people and leaders approach the bureaucracy as basically as a toolkit, as a toolbox for them to work with, and also as true experts in their own right, and say, we've got this idea, how can I use the existing tools of bureaucracy in order to get this done? We'd find a much bigger collaboration. There's so many leaders that come in and say, I don't like the bureaucracy, I'm just going to add this task force on top, or I'm going to have this secret group that meets over to the side, and they may get their big idea out, but they'll find that it doesn't actually end up going anywhere. So I can understand it. I think I have assigned my students, and many others have all read Bob Comer's Bureaucracy Does Its Thing, and know the challenges that bureaucracy faces within this. But a lot of it comes into just like how people understand the objective of bureaucracy, and whether or not it's meant to slow it down. I think inertia also comes out a lot of in our political system. People are afraid to make big changes for fear that they're going to be judged for things going wrong, particularly in national security, what feels like a much more sort of impactful space.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more about your point about the bureaucracy. Again, I'm a passionate believer in the civil servants and the civil service, and the foreign service and the members of federal service, and how engaged and energetic they are. But sometimes there's this disconnect and this mistrust that doesn't allow the folks who have been there for a long time as part of the bureaucracy to really use their creativity to advance these bigger ideas. And the times when we have seen that happen, I think we've seen tremendous success. So I definitely did not vote for the bureaucracy, but I did vote for inertia, because I do think inertia, letting our habits dictate our decisions and not taking those risks, is a huge issue. And I think when we have great leadership that brings out the creativity from the civil service, then we get, I think, tremendous results. So I picked one, but I don't see the two of them as being connected. I would love to hear what our judges think of this, where they see the biggest obstacles. Over to you, Lauren, to figure out which judge is on the hot seat first.
Absolutely. I think some of them are mid-voting. So I'll start with Dave to what does he think? We talked a bit before about your background, Dave. Where do you think some of the biggest obstacles of policy change emerge? Did you line up with where our polls came out, or do you think that actually comes from another source?
So in my thinking, I actually chose inertia. I really appreciated that was an option, because it's basically all of the above, and you're going to find it everywhere. In my experience in my career, we too often get caught up in the sunk cost fallacy that you and Shai referenced when you were speaking earlier, and we've got to be braver in challenging the current order of things. One of the areas in my experience where I've seen this be a problem is those programs and those operational concepts that just won't die, even though they're outdated. We have to be ready to cut what doesn't work, and we can't be afraid, frankly, when the bomb throwers come out to accuse us of being insufficiently supportive of the troops, for example. Because the fact is that we put lives at risk when we don't challenge the rigidity of our current approaches.
Thanks, Dave. The one I was curious about, and actually I was the one who added this answer in, so civil relations was not seen as a big obstacle to policy change in the defense space. So in some ways I find that quite heartening, but in other ways I think that there's, as I was saying earlier, there's a lot of sort of relational and perception issues that hinder us in making progress in policy issues in national security and defense. Cole, we've talked some in this space. I'm curious, did you expect bureaucracy to come out on top? Did you think that Congress was going to be the biggest barrier to policy change, or where do you weigh in on this poll question?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. It's interesting. I have not served in government yet, so I was looking at this question and trying to figure out personally, from the outside looking in, it does seem that bureaucracy shapes so much of, you can almost say bureaucracy and inertia are antonyms from the outside looking in. Of course, those two would come out on top from the outside. And so I thought that was interesting. That resonated with the audience. To your point, I was surprised to see civil military relations so low. Not that I had a clear picture of what I imagined that would be, but especially in the moment that we're in right now, where things are very tense within the country, and just trying to, the military, and speaking as a member, we need to execute and rigorously adhere to the standards at which we hold ourselves and the public expects to see the military, whether active duty, reserve component, whatever it is. The expectations are highest on the military. And so it is refreshing to see that the audience is not currently viewing civil military relations as a specific impediment to moving DoD objectives forward. That was refreshing and interesting to see.
Christine, I also wanted to check in with you on this question. I think, CNAS just put out this report, Rising to the China Challenge, several months ago, earlier this year. And it made a lot of comparisons between how China does, I believe the term is military civil or civil military fusion, how they're much more integrated in what we might call a whole of government approach. They have certain assets to their system that helps them be able to pursue their overall strategy more effectively, more cohesively, and with greater clarity on who's supposed to be doing what. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how the United States compares to China's system in terms of where its barriers to policy change come in, and where the United States barriers to policy change come in terms of either these responses that we see here or other areas that you see?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. It's a great question. And I think, it's great to see that this heat has really spotlighted some of the creative thinking about how to bring in not only key allies that are sort of at the forefront of innovation, but also strategic partners in Southeast Asia and in Africa. And I think here at CNAS, we've been able to do some really interesting work thinking about how to work with allies on sort of the innovation front, on defense innovation in particular. And so I think, oftentimes the challenge is creating proper incentives for allies to jointly innovate with American companies, particularly when they have, equities with China. And so I think, bringing in private sector, not only in the United States, but also in our ally and partner countries is a critical part of the equation. And so I actually worked on a report with some of my colleagues at CNAS, Dan Kleiman and Josh Fitt, sort of looking at how to build an alliance innovation base to overcome these challenges of inertia and bureaucracy that we're looking at in this poll.
So Carrie, one last question for judges that I wanted to check with you on. So when in the many years that you spent in government, and at times that you had late nights or you got assigned a task that was frustrating, which of these areas did you curse the most in terms of big ideas that you were trying to drive forward and you just knew you were going to struggle up against either one of these barriers that's highlighted in the poll, or something else that you think that really inhibits the United States from driving policy change in the national security space?
Well, a lot of the work that I was doing was not at the policy pushing level, but more at the operational at the operational level, but there is one instance I can think of in particular, when I was pursuing a proposal to change the way that an interagency process worked. And what was integral in making that proposal move forward was the support of the executive of that particular department. The ability to be, and that's why I think this activity that we're engaged in today, and the ability to have people who potentially want to be putting forth these types of proposals in real life, this framework, it really does matter, because you have to be able to articulate. And I think one of the notes that I wrote down when I was listening to several of the participants in this heat was, what is the problem that you are trying to solve? And I think that is a key question when individuals, and so I can think of examples of this in my experience, but I also share this for, those that are thinking about how to apply the types of proposals that they're talking about today in real life, is you have to be able to articulate that there is a problem, and what is it within the bureaucracy if you're trying to fix the way something works in government. What's the problem? Why is that a problem? And here's how you fix it. And one of the things that I was trying to listen for, and I think in some of our participants in the last heat, I heard it, and in others I didn't, was what was the problem that they were trying to solve. And if folks can keep that frame in mind, I think it might be helpful down the road.
That's such a great point. So Shai, I think we just got a couple more minutes until we start Heat 4. Is there any feedback that you from our audience on Twitter or in the chat that you think is worth calling out?
Oh, absolutely. There's conversations going on, and I admit there are some conversations going on directly with some of our speakers, which is exactly what we wanted. And because our speakers are such great experts, I don't fully understand all the back and forth personally, so I may not read every single one of those exchanges. But first, let me just get to one from Alex Gallo from Common Mission Project, who is, of course, one of the sponsors of this event, the specific event, who just reached out to say that the pitches are amazing and he is glad to be supporting CNES. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, Common Mission Project. There are some other comments that I'd love to read just that have come in throughout the day. Sophia Lancel in the chat wrote and said, I would agree that Congress ought to involve itself more in national security issues. What I would like to see, however, is a push from the military industrial complex to diversify our national security posture with new technology. I wonder if Sophia thinks that industry really is part of the solution here. And then we have some other great ones here. And again, a lot from our contestants as well. But Natalie Grogan, she just gave a shout out to the all of round 3. She said, round 3 took us around the world and beyond: Africa engagement, Arctic alliances, outer space, South China Sea and Southeast Asia claims, and trade in South Central Asia. Wow, to infinity and beyond. GIF. I guess there is a GIF or GIF depending on what you use. So that's the kind of thing that we love hearing from people. We got a question that from one of our viewers that I really thought was interesting, and I think this is great to ask this group of people, you and our judges, which is, for folks who are getting started in their careers, we got a lot of people that are just getting started that are watching or engaging. Where do these good ideas come from? Once you're inside government, how do you get these ideas generated? Do you just like go into your mind palace and think them out? Do you brainstorm with other people? What do you think is the best way to take one of these pitches, or if you have a light bulb moment, into reality?
Shai, that's a great question. I'm going to weigh in now and use that as my transition to Heat 4, which I think we're just about getting ready for. But we would definitely want to come back to our judges with that question as well. And I think that I'll say 2 things. One, I think there's so many meetings that you sit in and think, I could fix this if people would just, and fill in the blank. The fill in the blank is that idea. You get enough aware of all the context and the people and all of the issues that you're working on, that you become very familiar with the elephant in the room that people just aren't seeing. The other thing I would say is my amazing colleague Alon Goldenberg from CNES told me when I started here that there are some stories and there are some policy recommendations that only you can tell. You're the only person in the world who was a part of that and saw all of the pieces of that picture, and you're the one who is able to go out and tell the world, this is what was wrong, this is what was right, and to share that with the universe. You're going to have dozens of moments like that throughout your career. You just don't necessarily know when they're happening, but when one occurs to you, take advantage, write it all down, and make sure that your takeaways get out into the world in some way, which I know there's challenges that to others. So Shai, before I kick it over, are we ready to move on to Heat 4 at this point?
We are ready to move on to Heat 4. Before we get that heat starting, we also have, I said last poll, I was so excited to get through Heat 4. I forgot we do have one more poll before we get to the People's Choice, but coming up after Heat 4, if you are watching, if you are in our audience, you will have a chance to pick the People's Choice. If you aren't watching, or if you know people who aren't watching, go tell them, come on in, come and join us, because we're starting at around 3:55, 4 o'clock. There will be about a half-hour window where people can vote for the People's Choice, which will be revealed later in the program. In the meantime, our penultimate poll is, how much impact does public opinion in the United States have on the potential for positive change in national security? And we have there's a bunch of different levels. You can pick one of them, or again, add your own answer. Would you like me to kick off Heat number 4, national security institutions? Lauren, we ready to go?
I think we are. Let me give a quick introduction here. This is our final round of competitors for today's event. As a reminder, as Shai said, we're going to be asking you for inputs in the People's Choice Award. We want to hear your feedback in the chat and also at hashtag CNES 2020. For our final heat, we ask contestants to give us their best ideas on national security institutions. What is a key reform to U.S. national security institutions, including structures, processes, or human capital, that would help the United States adapt to evolving challenges in strategic competition? So all of you know, well, if you don't, you will now, that process is my Valentine. National security institutions are my favorite part of this overall competition. So I'm so excited. But it's good to remind our contestants and our audience that all of these great policy ideas that proceeded, and they were fantastic, they won't have a shot unless our institutions aren't ready to execute. So that's why I'm so excited about this segment, but I don't get to judge, so I don't want to bias anyone else. So no pressure, contestants, but you get 2 minutes to make your pitch in order
That's right, contestants. Lauren and I are not judges, but Lauren is the vice president at the Partnership for Public Service. So she has, so her opinion in the grand scheme of getting these pitches off the ground, I think, is going to make a huge impact in the long run for our national security.
We're delighted to hear from Luke Chen, Adam Diedrich, Charlotte Gorman, and Mike Schoengold. And so first I'm going to turn it over to Shai. Is Luke ready to go?
Luke, are you ready? Luke, we can see you. Can we hear you?
Hi, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, which means your time begins now.
Right, thanks for the introduction. So I used to work in financial services in a big office building. And so joining the Air Force was definitely a change of pace, but one thing didn't change: the office furniture. Now I know people call the Air Force the chair force, but I was still pretty surprised to see those expensive ergonomic mesh chairs everywhere. They're very comfortable, but joking aside, this is a sign of a spending mismatch, and much of this mismatch is because of the use or lose budget phenomenon, where organizations scramble to spend all their unused budget at the end of the year to maintain their budget size for the next year. It's a dramatic problem beyond furniture purchases for the billions we spend in defense contracts. In the single final week of fiscal year 2017, the DoD spent $23 billion on contracts. That's 4 times the average amount of every other week. So how do we combat use or lose budgeting? Introducing my pitch, the fidget spinner rule, named after the Army buying $6,000 of fidget spinners in the last week of 2017. Under my proposal, rather than using total spending to decide next year's budget, you would instead base it off of a new accounting metric called meaningful expenditures. This metric would take into account number 1, the category, and number 2, the timing of the spending. Number 1, category matters. If you're buying fidget spinners, maybe only 60% of a $100 purchase would be considered meaningful. On the other hand, if spending on categories more critical to national security, like aircraft avionics, then maybe 95 or more of that $100 would be considered meaningful and credited towards next year's budget decisions. Number 2, timing should matter as it currently doesn't. As the last week of the year approaches, less and less of a $100 purchase, regardless of its category, would be considered meaningful. This incentivizes balanced and responsible spending throughout the year, rather than last-minute Hail Mary spending. Overall, the fidget spinner rule is a simple and actionable rule that works in tandem with existing budget controls. As great power competition intensifies, it'll give us every dollar we can get. Thank you.
Luke, thank you so much. We are now ready for our next pitcher. You will have the opportunity to elaborate when the judges put you on the hot seat. And next up, we have a fellow who has been quite active on Twitter all day today, cheering on his colleagues, his peers. Adam Dietrich, welcome to the program. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Can you see us?
Yep, I see everyone. I think
Great.
we're all good.
We can see you, which means your time begins now.
Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. What do these three conflicts have in common? They're largely low-intensity conflicts where the U.S. military forces won tactical victories, but ultimately failed to achieve strategic goals. So to navigate this problem, I propose the State Department and Department of Defense create joint gray zone task forces that would provide strategic political and military leadership for competition below the level of armed conflict. These groups would be regionally aligned, headed by senior foreign service officers, who would be paired with a general or flag officer in the role of military advisor. I hold two premises for this: the national defense strategy, and that great power competition means the United States is more likely to find itself in smaller wars than a return to a large, high-intensity conflict. By placing diplomats and military officers at the head of the table, this organization allows for complementary actions, both military and diplomatic, to be taken. Having experienced foreign service officers provides strong regional expertise that would temper any gray zone strategy into something that is realistic and achievable. Native to these gray zone task forces would be the necessary intelligence, cyber, and planning staff to counteract gray zone campaigns and rise to meet other political military challenges. Additional military units could be forward deployed to provide greater but limited tactical capacity. U.S. Army Special Operations units and conventional assets such as the Security Forces Assistance Brigades are examples of units that would be the best fit to meet the needs of a gray zone task force. The relevant military mission set could include counterinsurgency, countering violent extremism, unconventional warfare, atrocity prevention, and capacity building. The gray zone task forces would coordinate with the Department of State and Department of Defense in order to shrink the gray zone. The task forces themselves would provide the organizational structure, regional expertise, and strategic leadership for the United States to compete and win within the gray zone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. All right. And again, Adam's been active on Twitter, folks. So if you want to engage and ask him questions, I bet he'll be psyched to answer your questions. Next up, we have Charlotte Gorman. Charlotte, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you. Can you see us?
Yes.
Terrific. That means your time begins now.
We need to bring the outdated security clearance process into the 21st century to have the best possible national security workforce at the ready. Let's use lessons learned from pandemic-era teleworking to help us do this. Our public sector cannot be competitive, particularly intelligence, defense, and diplomacy jobs that require clearances to onboard, with a massive backlog and arduous investigation process. This problem has resulted in a loss of talent to other sectors and a disproportionately economically privileged and homogeneous workforce that does not reflect the diversity of our country we serve and protect. With the existing barriers of unpaid internships and student debt incurred from graduate programs, clearances add an extra hurdle for candidates, and only those who can afford to wait it out for sometimes 500 days end up in roles that they're then often too qualified to accept. The inefficiency of the security clearance process deters the best and brightest from pursuing federal employment. The private sector offers higher salaries and a guaranteed start date, And so particularly for the cybersecurity challenges we face, we're losing skilled candidates to big tech. To modernize the clearance system, we need to use technology to our advantage to reduce waiting times and avoid miscommunication. The coronavirus has forced us all to get creative, and we should use this period as a catalyst to introduce video interviews, a secure online messaging system to keep in contact with candidates, and integrating online submission of travel and living records into investigations. This does not sacrifice rigor. In fact, since the records of our lives are increasingly online, and since candidates are mobile, this improves the quality of investigations and reduces inefficiency. Many attempts to improve this process have been hampered by status quo bias. However, the recent shift from OPM and the National Background Investigations Bureau to the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency that currently handles most investigations is a stepping stone to further reform. This issue may seem minute, but it truly impedes us from being as competitive as possible with a solid base of talented, nonpartisan public servants. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. We are now getting ready for the last and definitely not least of the day. Mike Schoengold, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
That's great. We can see you, which means we're almost ready to start. Mike, your time begins now.
We need to stop treating our diplomats like dignitaries. When our diplomats are locked in embassy fortresses, it only hurts our ability to understand sub-state conflict, build relationships, and promote American values. As former Ambassador Ann Patterson said, we can't prevent conflict if we're not there. The solution, we need to unleash diplomats and create a civilian vanguard of expeditionary diplomacy. We need a diplomatic special forces with the ability to get to the front lines. The good news is we've done some of this before. PRTs, EPRTs, JPRTs, but it's been small scale and ad hoc and certainly not institutionalized. So here's my pitch. First, we need a standard way to integrate State Department employees with certain special forces units around the world when necessary. Second, we need to give these integrated civil military units special training and recruit the right kind of diplomats for this very special mission. And finally, we need a new kick-ass diplomatic culture that accepts more creativity, innovation, and risk for this really special diplomatic special forces mission. Doing this won't require new funding streams or new authorities. We have parts of the State Department and Department of Defense that already are built for this mission. Right now, we just need to institutionalize, prioritize, and ensure these parts of the State Department can grow. In closing, national security in the 21st century is still about people. It's about getting our diplomats into the field, into the action. We need to double down on innovation in our diplomatic service, and the diplomatic special forces can really lead the way.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. As a former State Department person myself, I definitely identify with a lot of what you're talking about there. Now I'm going to bring it over to Lauren to take our judges through the Q&A.
Thanks, Shai. This is our last round of questions from judges to all of our contestants. As a reminder to folks tuning in right now, every contestant gets one question, after which the judges will be judging them based on a series of criteria that we've provided to decide who are the 4 finalists from each of the heats. But judges, I don't know about you, all of those pitches were some serious knee bucklers. You've got time to ask each contestant one question. Carrie, I'll start with you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. And I can't believe that we're already at heat 4 of this competition. It's been really interesting to listen to all of the presenters today with a wide variety of ideas and very persuasive presentations. My question for this round is going to be for Luke, who presented on the issue of the use or lose budget in the Defense Department. And Luke, I just want to tell you, as someone who really was not involved, I did not work on budget issues. I have a number of colleagues at CNAS who are just expert on the Defense Department budget, but it's not my area. And so I think you did a really terrific job of describing the budget in a way that was very understandable to those of us who are not steeped in budget minutia. My question for you really gets to implementation of your idea. How would you actually see your idea move forward as a practical matter? Whose support within the institutions would you need in order to be able to get rid of this use or lose aspect of the budget?
Hi, can you hear me? So the question was, how do you get my idea actually off the ground? And that's a really good question, because I think a lot of these proposals, sometimes they get internal forces want to stop them. And so I think my idea is good because you can start off small. You don't necessarily have to apply it all through the whole DoD. You could maybe just apply it to a smaller organization in the DoD. And so I would find a leader in one of these organizations who's very willing to take the risk of trying to stop use or lose budgeting. And I would do a test run. So you would do a test run with this organization, and based off of the impact to financial spending, you would use that information to decide on the specifics for other organizations. That way, it's just a very flexible and not one size fits all solution. And just to close, a disclaimer, this opinion is my personal opinion and not part of the DoD's opinion. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. Next question goes to Dave.
Hi, my question is for Adam on your gray zone task force concept. As we've seen, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine situation, a lot of gray zone competition hinges on who prevails in the information space. And one of the things you need to prevail in this space is the agility to, for example, respond quickly to enemy information campaigns. We know that Russia has flooded the zone with a lot of propaganda, malicious Twitter bots, and things like that. How do you ensure that a task force like this doesn't just lay another piece of bureaucracy that would keep the United States from adapting its narrative to changing circumstances on the ground?
I think, can everybody hear me? Okay, I'll just go. I think that's a very important question. With any organization or transition there, you need buy-in kind of across the system in order for that new organization to not, to be able to function correctly. So within the idea of the task force, the idea would be to have, the intelligence assets, the information like public affairs or psychological operations kind of assets already native in the building, that they would constantly be monitoring and working on these solutions. And from a broader standpoint, the relationships by having military officers rotate in, having senior foreign service officers rotate in who might have worked at the nearby embassies, or the officers who might have served in the combatant commands, to have these networked relationships with the other stakeholders in the region to allow for a coordinated response.
Sorry, I have been so invested in everyone's answers, but I have forgotten to move the show along. But so kudos to everybody for distracting me in that
Also,
way.
don't you get a little nervous for them, Lauren? Like when those questions get asked, I'm like, oh, what would I do? But then I remember they are the experts and they can answer about their business.
And every time I see Jasmine, who is our amazing manager behind the scenes, saying, you've got 30 seconds, I think, oh, but Lauren, you're not talking. It's okay. So next question goes to Christine.
Great, thanks, Lauren, and congratulations to all of the tremendously creative presentations. My question is for Charlotte, and I think actually Lauren has done a lot of writing on this subject and probably has a number of responses going through her head as well. But curious how you're thinking about the sort of talent pipelines and the recruitment of talent beyond the clearance process. So particularly thinking about diversity in government service. Wanted to get your sense of how you think the US government as a whole should best strategize about bringing top talent to work for their agencies. Do you have any high-level strategies or guidance that you would provide to decision makers on that front?
Gosh, what a great question and what a timely moment for it. So much to say, but I will say a lot of the commentary on this issue, I think, comes at the end of the pipeline where we look at why is the Intel community the only place where they're losing Black employees, or why are so many women not making it to senior positions, when really we need to be looking much earlier on in the pipeline. So when you look at why we have senior leadership that people often call pale, male, and Yale, we need to look at people can't afford to do these careers because they can't afford to live in DC, which is one of the most expensive cities in the US, and do an unpaid internship, get a master's, and wait sometimes up to 2 years. I mean, there's many horror stories. It has gotten better in recent years, but why would people want to join this sector, which is less paid? Often you're limited as to what you can say online and a public presence, and many things that could be said about joining the national security community. Why would you go through all these hurdles to do that if they're unnecessary? So I think I just focused on this one area. My pitch is they're kind of specific ideas. I think there's much more to be said about the use of contractors in background investigations, and why can't we be having people start on board and start doing unclass work and be able to fill their role before they can proceed and get their clearance. But I think those are much bigger fish to fry. I think the couple suggestions I've offered just seem to me such simple tweaks that could really improve the time, waiting period, and inefficiency, and video interviewing, and just it's nonsensical to me why the US government, with all of its talent and money at its disposal, can't be doing this more efficiently. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Cole, last question to our contestants goes to you.
It has flown by. Mike, my question is for you. I was very intrigued by your pitch, and I think it's just a fascinating idea. I want to dig into the logistics a little bit. You talk about establishing a civilian special operations force, but augmenting that with military SOF, soft forces. My question is, the United States asks so much of its special operations forces as it is, deploying them in a wide range of missions and tasks, some of which are within the scope of their original mission set, and some of which are not, especially over the last 20 years, if we've just grown more reliant on their specialties. My question is, where would the sourcing for this force protection, essentially, core come from? You talk about wanting to make sure that you have more expeditionary diplomats that are able to go out into the community more, which I think is a fascinating idea. I'm just curious, from a logistics process, are you sourcing these civilian SOF from currently serving military troops, or retraining State Department or just USG, U.S. government civilians as in special forces tactics? I'm just kind of curious if you could dig into the logistics of how that would work.
Yeah, thanks, Cole. I think it's a really important question because, as you said, for this very unique mission set, you're going to need people with very specialized skills. I can see a future where you have these diplomatic special forces pulled from both the ranks of our foreign service as well as the ranks of our special operators community. Both of those individuals have unique skill sets, and I think the value of having a more expeditionary, more integrated, and more innovative force together is that they can support each other and that they can complement each other. There are already models where diplomats are embedded individually in actual operators forward, sometimes in the field, sometimes in the headquarters elements that allow for that kind of fusion, allow for those kinds of cross-pollination of ideas. If we can allow our diplomats to really help shape the strategy, help shape the understanding, the history, they can help inform some of the unique tasks, as you mentioned, that our special forces community is required to do. While I understand the load right now is at an all-time high for these special forces, I think many of these units have a demand for more help from the civilians on complicated issues like humanitarian access, on detention support, on all the other complex gray zone areas, to pull from my prior colleagues' question too, all of their unique capabilities. So in a way, I don't see this as a load on the special forces. I hope that we can provide and train a group of foreign service officers that are actually adding to the special forces community.
Mike, thanks so much. And to all of the Heat 4 pitchers, I don't know about you, but in this heat, I am feeling the burn. Process is my Valentine. You guys did such a great job addressing the challenges of national security institutions. And I'm so inspired by these amazing ideas that you've come forward with today. I think they all have real potential, but are also really creative in a way that we don't see in this space very often. So Shai, I'm not sure if these puns have landed me in hot water yet, but hasn't this been an amazing show?
I have had so much fun doing this. I tweeted earlier, this truly is one of the most fun days of my professional life. I feel so fortunate. In fact, I feel like this is a great moment before we go and chat at our extended judges table moment, and extend a huge thanks to Jasmine Butler, Chris Estep, Cole Stevens, who is both a judge and worked behind the scenes, all of our judges, Carissa Nitchie, Will McKenzie, Richard Fontaine. There's tons of other people that have been involved. Claire Toner, who have helped make this production today, and a production that, by the way, is not over. The most complicated parts are still to come, because very soon, our distinguished judges, Michelle Flournoy and Mike Zach, board members of CNAS, they will go off into a special, high security Zoom room where they will deliberate and cast their votes for the best in show today. But yeah, this has been so much fun. I would love, if we have a moment before we get into talking to the judges, just to read some of the incredible comments that we've seen on Twitter and in the chat. And again, to go back to why we wanted to do this event, it was really, I mean, yes, it's exciting, there are going to be winners, but really this is all about elevating all of these different voices and all 16 of our competitors and getting their ideas out there. And we have seen tremendous collegiality between them. So Drake Long, from one of our earlier heats, he writes about Adam Dietrich, great pitch, another solution to the gray zone. And then Alan McQuinn writes, should have brought props. Fidget spinner dude won me over. He's, of course, talking about Luke Chen's fidget spinner moment, which will, I think, go down in pitch history. And then Nikolai Rice, he says he loved Heat 4 so much, he just says he's voting for all of Heat 4 as his people's choice. Nikolai, that's actually not how the voting works, but in fact, that voting's about to start momentarily. And then Christine Peterson from earlier today, she writes, great pitch by Charlotte Gorman addressing the barriers to diversity and national security. She rightly points out that often those who can wait out long clearance processes plus student debt plus unpaid internships are for elites and do not reflect the diversity of our nation. Having supervised many interns over the years, I could not agree more with Christine's comment. And then finally, Yakovos Balassi, he writes, great idea from Adam Dietrich on succeeding in the gray zone. So the gray zone clearly has a big following out there. I bet Elon Goldenberg from CNAS, who recently published a report on combating Iran in the gray zone, will be very interested in that. With that, Lauren, should we go and have a little Top Chef judges table with our judges?
Yes, and so I am torn between, are we doing Top Chef judges table or are we doing Great British Bake Off? And if so, do we need to bring our accent game to the table? I didn't quite prepare for that, but I think we can stick with either model. I will also want to thank all of our judges for not only their participation today, but the really engaged questions, the feedback that they offered, and the excitement that they've had this whole time about this fantastic process. I'm so hopeful that we can do something like this next year, live and in person, to continue this fantastic tradition. So I'll just sort of start with an open-ended question of, now that we are at the end of the day, we've seen all 16 amazing contestants. what are your big reactions? What's your top level takeaways here? Now that we've gotten to the end of the day. Before I get started, I just want to mention, I'm going to go to Carrie first. We are doing the People's Choice vote. We're going to open up that poll in just a moment. If folks can stick around for that, please pay attention when that comes open. You'll be able to select amongst all 16 contestants for the People's Choice. But on the judges' side of the house, Carrie, what's been your takeaway today? What's your big reaction?
Well, I'm just so encouraged by the fresh ideas that were presented today, and really also for almost all of our panelists, such professionalism and you can tell the preparation that went into their presentations today. So many of them were backed up by research. Several of the contestants today did a really great job of putting their proposal in historical context, which I think was really helpful. The other thing that I would point out is some of the contestants today did a really great job of being able to take a complex issue, for example, issues related to the Defense Department, which is a really wonky, specialized area, even within the Beltway, and making it accessible to an audience that maybe is not steeped in the budget, for example. And that's a really important skill if you're working in national security areas, because oftentimes, those of us who work in national security, you become expert in very, very detailed areas. For me, it's certain areas of the law. For others, it's very specific issues related to defense budget or a particular policy area. And you have to be able to communicate those ideas and that knowledge to senior leaders who might be new to government, executives who come in from outside government and are political appointees and may or may not be so steeped in these deep substantive areas, or to members of Congress who might be newly elected and are learning a whole new world of national security policy that they didn't previously have exposure to. And so that skill of being able to translate complex, deep issues that maybe the person presenting or briefing on the issue has spent years studying, but you have to be able to communicate it in a way to individuals who are smart and who are quick studies, but may not have that same deep background. And I think a number of our presenters today did a really great job with that.
Carrie, I could not agree more. I was struck over and over again that, when I was in the age range that we set for the pitch, that I'm not sure I could have had the poise, the background, the level of detail. And I worked for some terrifying bosses who demanded this kind of competence and assuredness when they had folks come in to brief them. So kudos all around to folks, and just an incredible job on that. But Dave, I also wanted to turn to you on like big takeaways from today in terms of what you thought about the pitches overall, and also get your sense of, from your time that you spent in government, how would these have gone over with some of the bosses that you had worked for before?
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing I want to say is how sad I am that we're almost at the end here. I'm wondering if maybe the producers could end this show in a cliffhanger so we can get picked up for another season. I think today's presentations were incredible. I'm just so heartened to see all these great ideas coming through, and I hope no matter who wins, that we have a way to keep these ideas alive and to keep them gaining traction in their respective communities. One of the things I often talk about with my friends and my family about what it's like to work in national security is that you lose sleep, and I feel like the things I heard here today are going to help me sleep just a little bit better. I'd also add that I think one of the great things about these ideas and with respect to the reactions I think they'd get in government, on one hand, I think a lot of these ideas would be very welcomed. On the other hand, I think some of these are going to make people uncomfortable, but that's exactly what we want. We want to challenge people's preconceptions. We want to challenge the old ways of doing things. We want to gain agility, et cetera, to actually be able to outcompete the threats that are coming over the horizon.
Dave, I love your last point about being uncomfortable with being comfortable with being uncomfortable in new ideas. I had a former supervisor once who, before he would go to National Security Council meetings, he would not prepare for meetings that he thought were going to be bad, boring, old hat, nothing new under the sun. The meetings that he thought were going to be good and worthwhile were the ones that he spent the most time preparing for. So, but because he knew he would be made uncomfortable by the concepts being floated, by the opinions being voiced, and so on. So I think that that's a high mark of success for folks to be able to make the policy system uncomfortable. Christine, I'm so sad that you were only able to be here for part of the day, but I wanted to get your take on the two heats that you got to listen to, and what was your big takeaway for the day?
Sure. So I've just been deeply honored to have been able to watch the presentations on the multilateral initiatives and allies, as well as that of the national security institutions. I'm so deeply impressed, and I think the presentations really get to the heart and the ethos of what CNAS is about. All of the analysis was polished, crisp, incisive, and I think importantly, brought creative solutions to the table. I think the problem diagnosis is the easy part, and it's easy for think tanks to fall into the trap of, getting hung up on identifying the problems without bringing concrete solutions to the table. So really appreciated the thought and the creativity that went into proposing solutions, and really look forward to engaging with all of our contestants further on making their ideas a reality in government in the future.
Thanks, Christine. I wanted to mention again that the People's Choice voting, the People's Choice poll is open right now. So whether you're tuning in right this second, you've been with us the whole day, or you've been in and out, now is the chance to weigh in on who the audience thinks was the top pitch of the day out of the four heats, whether it be economy and technology, alliances and multilateralism, military and defense, or national security institutions. We want to hear from you on that. And then Cole, in terms of thinking through your overall, in terms of hearing from you on your overall takeaways for the day, I'd love to hear, if these folks showed up at CNES to be part of the CNES team, how excited would you be to be able to work with them on bringing their ideas to a public audience?
I'll echo Christine about just being really honored and just proud to be able to be a part of such an esteemed group of judges, but really most importantly, able to hear from and learn from all these contestants. I mean, I'm blown away by the professionalism and the preparation and all the factors that went into such a successful round of pitches. First, as a communicator, so impressed with the way that they prepared their pitches, delivered them. They hit every metric of success as far as delivering a message goes. Concision, meeting your audience where you are, nailing the key points that they wanted to hit. The whole, from start to finish, each pitch raised the bar on that front. And then secondly, as a young professional in the national security space, and Lauren, to your questions, to seeing one of these fantastic contestants theoretically in a role at CNAS, it's inspiring to see young leaders and diverse leaders in this sense bringing such practical, specific, reasoned out policy ideas that you could easily see and would hope to see implemented on the national stage. So the idea of working with these contestants in the future, as we all inevitably come up and become leaders within kind of the next generation of national security thinkers and professionals, beyond just being inspired, that's exciting. I'm really looking forward to hearing from and learning more from these contestants and watching their careers and hoping to continue to take pages and pages of notes on their thoughts. So just wanted to say thank you again to the contestants and to this panel of judges.
Shai, I am waiting on your inner Simon Cowell to come out, or pick your favorite behind the scenes host or judge of any of these reality shows. What questions do you have for our amazing judges?
Well, I'd love, let's go into the realm of the presentational, right? You know, I think everyone in CNAS has spent some time with me over the last year prepping for an interview, talking about a particular engagement. And I would love, if you don't have to mention a particular, you don't have to mention a particular contestant if you don't want to. But I would love to know from a presentation standpoint, what were some of the strongest things you saw? I mean, everyone's going to be talking about Luke Chen's fidget spinner till the end of time. That was a nice gamble. I thought that was a gamble. That's something that could pay off or not pay off for me because it served the purpose of his story that he was telling, because he was giving an example about waste and um, and the fidget and the fidget spinner, having that in his hand was terrific. I would love to know from you all, from a presentation standpoint, which ones really spoke to you. What were some of the gambles? What were some of the great moments? And I'll direct the question first to one of my daily partners in crime, Cole Stevens. We do comm stuff every day together. What do you think?
I thought Leah's performance in her pitch in session or in heat two is just, I mean, I was on the edge of my chair. I was so hooked into what she was saying. I mean, while she was clearly prepared and knew exactly what she wanted to say, she delivered it in such a natural, compelling, engaging way that, you know, I kind of forgot I was a judge watching, you know, a think tank event and not, you know, watching Top Chef or Shark Tank. I mean, I was ready to sign on right then and there. So I'll be taking notes. I'm going to watch the post game tape on that and take some notes from Leah, because I found that very, very compelling, the way that she was able to deliver a complex message in such an understandable way.
Okay, over to Christine Lee. Christine Lee, someone who again spent the first half of the pitch on the hot seat herself up on Capitol Hill. You got to see heats 3 and 4 and a little bit of 2 in their entirety. Which performance, which speaker did you think really hit that presentation mark?
Sure. So I think, you know, I was very impressed by all of the speakers' sort of use of scene setting at the beginning of their presentations to really get me sucked into the idea that they were selling. And Shai, we've talked about this a lot, but the use of strategic pauses to sort of ratchet up the drama of the pitch, I think was something that I saw across most, if not all of the presentations that I was able to sit in on. I was very impressed by Luke's presentation for sort of, you know, pitching new frontiers in alliance cooperation. I thought, you know, obviously we're not judging based on backgrounds or props, but I thought his whole persona and the way he carried himself and delivered his idea was very crisp and professional all around. But I commend all of our presenters on their communication skills and getting their ideas across.
Awesome. Well, let's go next to Dave. I am saving, of course, our CNN star for last. So first, Dave, what do you think?
Sure. I also enjoyed some of the backgrounds that we had behind the presenters, especially when they were useful. I really liked Grace Kim's background, actually, because I also thought that it helped literally set the scene. As you guys might have noticed, that was the famous nighttime picture of the globe, but also zoomed in on the Korean Peninsula. And that picture is often used to point out the technological gap that separates North from South Korea, because North Korea is basically entirely dark on that picture. And I think it also helps capture the visual there, because frankly, it makes North Korea look like more of the ocean. And I think it really helped bring across in a very subtle way the point that Grace was making about reconceptualizing how we think about geography. And also just add that I think in the business that we're in, we spend a lot of time thinking about policies and processes, but we don't spend enough time thinking about history and identity. And geography has a lot of bearing on that. So I'm really glad that one of the presenters was able to touch on that aspect of national security.
Terrific, terrific. All right, going for the room rater approach. Again, room rating had no factor into actual scoring, but again, we're having a little fun here. We're talking about presentation. Now, Carrie, you spend hours under the hot lights on CNN. What did you see as some of the strong performances today. Is there anyone you're ready to bring with you, on the air next time you go?
Well, I have to say, so as you've been talking with the other judges, I went back through my very detailed notes that I've been keeping and I've been writing as we've been going through. And I have, notes next to Grace Kim, that her presentation, like the actual way in which she presented, was excellent. For Leah Matchett, I wrote next in the margins, great energy. I also wrote high energy for Alan McQuinn. And so those were three that stuck out to me. And I think that energy piece really was a lot of it, that I could tell that they were all excited about their idea, and their excitement and their energy about their proposal and about being here with us today really came through. I also want to take a minute, Shai, to just acknowledge the environment that we are in, because all of these presenters have adapted to our world of working virtually and doing their presentations virtually. And so much of working in the national security field calls upon those working in it to be able to be flexible and to be able to adapt to circumstances that are unpredictable and that are changing. And so I think one of the wonderful things about today is that we were able to, as an institution at CNAS, adapt to the virtual environment and put on this presentation and hear these ideas in the virtual format. But even more importantly, that this next generation of national security practitioners and leaders and academics and policymakers and policy doers all adapted to our present circumstances, our present national and world circumstances, by doing a presentation online, whether they're in their home or whether they, wherever they physically are, and they're looking into a camera on their device, is very different than being in a conference room where you can read the room dynamics and where you can look people in the eye who you are presenting to. So really, I offer such congratulations to all of our participants for pushing forward and being able and capable to adapting to our current world environment.
Thank you so much. And I think that is such a great inspirational point and note. Having to give these lightning talks in front of a room full of people, especially the audience that comes to our annual conference, is one thing. Then having to do it and not be able to see them, that's a whole other level. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, Christine, Cole. I think we are not wrapping the show. In fact, there is still 10 more minutes to vote for People's Choice, but we are soon wrapping our time with these judges who have been here for 3+ hours, taking detailed notes, giving their rankings. We are so grateful for you to be here. I'm gonna pass it to Lauren if she's got any parting words for the judges, and then we will have our world premiere of The Bottom Line, a short explainer video on the budget and the defense budget.
I just want to echo my thanks to the judges that Shai shared so elaborately. I think that this has been an incredible event. There's so much in national security that we perform behind closed doors. It's not a spectator sport for the most part. And it's one of my deepest hopes that changes, that we start having greater conversations with the American people about what national security issues are important to us and get their feedback on it, but also that we let them see us debate about, what matters, what doesn't matter, what costs more, what's worth the cost, and what's going to be difficult to implement. I think that we've kind of hidden a lot of that away from the American people for many years, and making that a better part of the national conversation is just absolutely crucial. So the judges today's involvement in every step of this process and their really close attention and support today has been incredible and really inspiring. So thanks to all of them. So Shai, over to you to kick off this video with our amazing colleague, Susanna Bloom.
All right, our technical director, Jarrell Clay, also, if we could our technical director, Jarrell Clay. If we could have the room stand up and give him applause. He's working so hard behind the scenes, pushing all the buttons and switching all the cameras. This is, if anyone's done a Zoom ever before, imagine, Zoom magnified by 16 different speakers in different times and videos. And he is about to queue up this video, and I'm just going to say a few words about it. It is, again, this is the world premiere. I come from the MTV generation, so we loved a good video world premiere when I was a kid, of The Bottom Line. It's a short video featuring our very own Susanna Bloom. She is the director of the CNAS Defense Program, and she is, of course, a senior fellow. And it is a dive into understanding the Department of Defense's annual budget, having spoken to Susanna, having heard her stories from the Back Channel episode. That's one of our CNAS podcasts. There are few people that can break down something so complex and make it sound so understandable and practical other than Susanna. So stay tuned momentarily for that. This production, of course, is part of a bigger research series that the defense team is doing, that they've been doing about the budget request. And it is also part of a series of explainer videos that you've seen on some other topics and will continue to see from CNS. So with that, I toss it to our amazing technical director, Jarrell Clay, to get the video rolling.
By any measure, the U.S. defense budget is really big, $738 billion in fiscal year 2020. The critical question is, how much is enough? How much does the United States really need to spend on defense? Defense hawks will tell you that defense spending is at an all-time low, both as a percentage of GDP and a percentage of overall federal spending. Those who would prefer that we spend less money on defense will tell you that the U.S. defense budget is now higher in absolute terms than it was during the height of the Cold War. They'll also tell you that the U.S. defense budget is larger than those of the next 7 countries combined. All of these facts are true, but none of them are relevant to determining how big the U.S. defense budget should be. The question where we always need to start is what does the president, what does the Congress want the military to be able to do? And so from those strategic principles, there are resource implications that flow from that. For example, if the United States decided to cede the Western Pacific to China, if the military just packed up all its toys and went home tomorrow, we could save a lot of money on defense spending. The problem is, in making that decision, we would be sacrificing the U.S. ability to influence the most economically dynamic and vibrant region in the world. And that would have a real impact on every American citizen. The other implication is that we would be walking away from our alliance commitments in the region. And our alliances are one of our biggest strategic advantages over countries like China and Russia. You need to be cognizant of the fiscal reality. On the one hand, it's possible to get an enormous defense budget, think $1 trillion a year, and not spend it on the things that are required to execute the national defense strategy that the department is currently operating with. Conversely, you could certainly see a world in which you've got a smaller defense budget, but spent correctly, that they're willing to accept more risk in certain areas. You know, you could spend less and still achieve the objectives outlined in the defense strategy. Faced with the kind of spurious arguments about whether defense spending should be higher or lower, again, the answer here is to go back to the fundamental question: what does the United States military need to be able to do to keep us safe?
All right, we are back. We are moments away from bringing our distinguished judges, Michelle Flournoy and Mike Zach, onto the program. Lauren, as you reflect on this amazing, can you reflect on this amazing day and the participants that you saw today?
I think my biggest reflections on this are that I am incredibly intimidated and so excited by the talent, the people, the next generation of folks who are serving or want to serve in national security. I am delighted that they will be kicking me out of any future roles that I may have, and that we will see them on CNN, behind the podium, getting sworn in after being confirmed by Congress. These folks are incredible, and they have far more insights about how national security actually works than I ever would have anticipated folks coming out of a younger generation of leaders in national security. So kudos to them. They did amazing. I think the other thing I would say is, I said at the beginning, this is a live production and a lot could go wrong. And remarkably, I mean, so far as I know, everything was perfect. Nothing has, and our production team is just the most talented and delightful and fabulous group of people. So thanks to everyone who was involved, and thanks to the CNES leaders for having faith in us that we could actually execute this and pull it off. Shai, what about you?
I would say that for me, there are so many pieces that go into something like this, and you do need to, sort of let go and let your team catch you when strange things happen. And we've had a few of those today, which no one will ever know about. But that's okay, because we've had an incredible team working with us today. The other thing that I'd like to say is that I feel like we didn't know how new and innovative ideas would be when we said, hey, put this out there. And I'm just so impressed by the detail with which people came back with their answers. So with their pitches. And I had a lot of fun getting to know all the contestants as we were prepping. So we are almost there. We're almost at the time for Michelle and Mike to join the program. In fact, if they are on, I think we should probably go to our distinguished judges table momentarily and ask them for their reflections on the day, and maybe ask them some of those fun questions about, what they'd love to invest in or go back in government and work on, because I know they've been watching. Over to you, Lauren, of course, to lead that part.
Oh, so are we?
Are Mike and Michelle on? Mike and Michelle are on, correct?
Yeah.
Mike's on.
That's terrific.
Okay, great. I didn't realize you guys had joined. Well, after I said everything had gone perfectly, of course, I screw it up. So I am so excited to bring in our distinguished judges who are going to help us select the best in show. They have been diligently watching our top 4 finalists from each heat to help us select which contestant will get over the top as the best in show awardee for the pitch. So first, let me introduce an incredible mentor, my former boss, former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, former CEO and one of the founders of the Center for New American Security, Michelle Flournoy. Thanks so much for being with us at the end of the day today.
I am delighted to be here. This is one of my favorite innovations at CNES.
And then secondly, I want to introduce Mike Zach, who is a current member of the CNES Board of Directors. He is a veteran of high-tech entrepreneurship and venture capital, and has been just such an incredible cheerleader and supporter of CNES over the years, particularly of ideas that will help us be more innovative and support the next generation. So Mike, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a privilege to be here and delighted to go along for the ride.
So as a reminder to our audience, we have gone through 4 heats today of alliances and multilateralism, military and defense, national security institutions, and the economy and technology. We've had a series of judges who have helped assess how well they performed across different criteria that we gave them earlier in the day. We've asked questions of those folks, and now we've kind of helped had Mike and Michelle have us narrow it down to some of our top contestants. As a reminder to other folks in the audience, in terms of prizes, each of our 4 finalists are going to work with CNES in partnership with a common mission project to sorry, to work each, let me say that one more time. Each of the 4 finalists are going to work with CNES in partnership with a common mission project to further develop and support their pitch. So the whole idea behind this event was sort of like a big Shark Tank for national security ideas. So I want to ask, before we go over and announce who the finalists were, Michelle, you spent years working in defense and national security policy. If you had to go back into government, or thinking back to your time in government, which ones of these pitches would you really want to see come across your desk, or would you want to see come in as an action officer to brief you? Which one would make you the most excited to be able to serve in government again? And if you can't decide on one, I understand. I'd love to hear your thoughts on which ones would be the most engaging for you as a leader.
Well, I must say, I was taken by, I was so impressed by all of the folks I saw pitch, and all of the pitches I heard. It's so creative, so thoughtful, thinking outside of the box. And it's just such a reminder of how important it is to welcome next generation voices into the national security and defense policy discussion. But one of my pet peeves, honestly, is how much money we waste at the Pentagon in terms of not, we don't always spend as wisely as we could and we should. We really should, given our responsibility to American taxpayers. So I really liked the pitch from, I guess it was Luke Chen, about how to avoid use or lose budgetary incentives that sort of push people to spend lots of money on low priority things so that next year they can get the same appropriation or higher, because they're punished if they actually don't spend the money by the end of the year. So it's a very perverse incentive structure, but very, very fundamental, and it affects billions and billions of dollars. So that one really struck me. And then I also liked both Grace Kim and Kyle Easton really had, I think, sort of fundamental suggestions about new ways of thinking about US strategy, whether it's how we think about our alliance with Korea vis-a-vis the broader competition in Asia, or whether it's how do we think about some of these new frontiers like space and undersea and so forth in the Arctic, and how do we work more better with allies to address this. So I just found, I actually want to go back and listen to all 16, because I didn't get a chance to do that, because the ones I did see were just to a pitch were just incredibly compelling and impressive.
Honestly, I had the same reaction to Michelle, like hearing these in the 2 minutes that they each had allotted. They packed in an incredible amount of information. They were so excited and energetic, and that I was just taken aback by all of the new thinking that started in the back of my mind. And I want to go back and re-engage the contestants as well as their ideas on this. So Mike, you have been a part of, I'm sure, dozens of conversations on which big ideas to fund, which do not merit getting additional funding, which you think are going to go to the next level and really are going to change the economy, the technology space, or how American society operates. You've been a part of those discussions for many years. So I'm curious, if you had to pick which one of these ideas would you really want to go invest in, or which, if there are several that you would want to invest in if you had somebody come to you, knock on their door and say, here's my pitch deck?
Sure. Overall, this has been a humbling experience over the last few hours. I found everything, without exception, to be tight, reasoned, and clear. I was especially pleased to see the focus on problem solving as opposed to pursuing agendas or looking for divisions instead of places where we could come together and do positive things. I think if there was one criticism that I would levy, in general, it's always a challenge to express in such a short period of time what it costs to launch some of these ventures, what it might cost to put it together, to get it in play, and to then maintain it. And I think we tend to do a good job of expressing aspiration and vision we tend to do a less good job of clarifying right up front what it might cost to get it done, and then conceivably what we might benefit, what the benefits might be for it. You know, as a venture capitalist, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you could look at a problem. I've always done early stage ventures, so the framework that I've tended to use, the filter I've tended to use, is the one that steps back from a proposal and leads me to think, well, you could never do that. That would make no sense. There's just no way you could pull that off. But if you could, this would be really a game-changing proposal. And as far as I was concerned, one of the proposals that met that criteria was Grace Kim's proposal on Korean security. I think that the one thing we can say about security in the Korean region is that by and large, it doesn't seem to work very well, especially lately. And so coming up with some new cuts on that problem strikes me as time well worth spending. And I thought that Grace came in with a, you know, kind of a different point of view that would be well worth pursuing.
Michelle and Mike, thanks so much for your feedback and advice on this. Shai, I think you had a question that you wanted to ask the two of them before we turn it over. Well, I guess I'll start with announcing People's Choice winner before we start announcing the winners.
Absolutely. First, Mike and Michelle, thank you so much for being a part of this show. This program, this event has been a dream program for us at CNAS ever since the lightning talk session last year at the annual conference. And I know, I know specifically, Michelle, you are a fan because I sat near you and you were focused every minute of that lightning competition. And when people have asked us, oh, where did you come up with this idea? I remember thinking that a lot of us saw how engaged you were with the next generation in that event last year. And we were thinking, oh, how can we pump this up to something even bigger? So now hoping and hoping we get to do this again next year, starting first with Michelle and then with Mike. What advice would you give for next year's contestants on how to prepare their pitches for next year?
Well, I guess I would say the ones that really I were thinking outside of the box. Really don't be afraid to break with orthodoxy and put a totally new idea on the table. And you know, sort of really be creative, really think outside the box, really take the risk of going with the big, bold idea that could be a game changer. I think that was what struck me from the ones that really appealed to me, was the level of creativity and getting outside of the constraints of years of US policy to kind of turn a problem a different way or think it from a different angle and come up with a very creative solution. I think that's the primary advice I would give.
That's terrific advice. All right, everyone who's watching, getting ready for next year, let's remember Michelle's advice. Mike, over to you. How would you tell next year's pitchers to prepare?
I think similar to what Michelle has just said, the attraction is for a big idea. And the reason that I'm drawn to big ideas, and I think the reason a lot of investors are drawn to big ideas, is because the minute you move to implementation, you're going to find lots of obstacles. And what you don't want to do is be stuck in too narrow an opportunity where even a modest obstacle might throw you off course. If you start off with a big idea, as you hit the speed bumps along the way, you'll find that just the enormity of the idea in the first place will provide you with a chance to fake left, go right, bob, weave, a comment you'll hear very often in the private sector is pivot. It'll give you the ability to pivot. And so I would underscore the usefulness, the importance of thinking big.
Well, thank you so much, Mike and Michelle. I now pass my time to my distinguished colleague, Lauren DeYoung-Schulman, who will announce the People's Choice Award.
So I said at the beginning of this event that a lot of what national security is about and about what this event is about is winning hearts and minds, which has some negative connotations in our national security history and experience. But so much of getting your ideas across the finish line is not just how great those ideas are, because they have to be great, but it's about making sure that you've got a team behind you, a team with you, and stakeholders around you who understand what you want to do, how much energy you're willing to put behind it, and why it's worth it to support, invest in, and take this idea forward. So in order to recognize that, we wanted to select a People's Choice reflecting the vote of all of you listeners, all of you audience members who have been with us throughout the entire day, have been so supportive of all of our amazing contestants in the pitch. So I am extremely excited to announce that one of our first contestants from our first heat on the economy and technology, Tina Huang, is our People's Choice winner. Congratulations, Tina. We are so excited for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a really awesome opportunity. And I also want to congratulate my fellow contestants who I was really impressed by their ideas as well. But thank you.
Thanks, Tina. I think, Shai, are we ready to do the four heat winners?
We are, and the 4 heat winners will be read off by our distinguished judge, Mike Zach. Mike, in the world of Zoom, of course, instead of handing you an envelope, in your private chat on the screen, you will see the winners of the 4 heats. Do you see those now? Have they appeared?
Yes, all set.
All right, then take it away.
Well, now I can say that I know what it feels like to be George Clooney at the Oscars when somebody hands me an envelope. So without having had an envelope handed to me, I'm pleased to announce that the winner of Heat 1 is Alan McQuinn, that the winner of Heat number 2 is Grace Kim, that the winner of Heat number 3 is Kyle Easton, and finally, the winner of Heat number 4 is Luke Chen. Congratulations to all 4 Heat winners.
What a terrific moment. You can hear Twitter and everybody clapping, but we won't ask everybody to unmute and clap because we think that'll probably convey very strangely on YouTube. Thank you, Mike, for making that announcement. If you're George Clooney, I don't know what that makes me as a person handing you the envelope, but I love the analogy. And as I stall for the moment of truth, Michelle, I believe your envelope has arrived in your chat as well for our Best in Show.
Just to do a little bit of a drum roll, I just want to say, when we founded CNAS back in 2007, one of the things, people said, why in the world does Washington need another think tank? And one of the differentiating factors was we felt there needed to be a think tank that would have as part of its mission growing the next generation of national security professionals, and a national security cadre that actually looks like America. And I think what you've seen today at this pitch event is some of those up and coming future leaders. And I cannot think of an event that is more on mission for CNAS and more needed and important than what we've seen today. So I just want to start by congratulating all of the finalists and frankly, the 100+ people who applied, of which we were only able to see 16 today. So congratulations to all of you. But now, drum roll, it's really my pleasure to announce the Best in Show award, which goes to Grace Kim for her very creative and strategic reconceptualization of the US-Korea alliance for the future. So congratulations, Grace. Well done.
Wow, thank you so much. I don't know what to say other than thank you. There's so many people to thank. I guess now I'm having my Oscar moment. There's so many people to thank. Thank you so much, first of all, to CNAS for even hosting this opportunity for me, you know, especially as a young professional. This has been such a great experience just to be involved, just to get to know the other participants, to connect with other people, all the prep that you have done. Thank you so much to the judges for tuning in and listening to us and caring about our ideas. To the co-hosts, you guys have been phenomenal holding our hands through the entire way. The managers in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, getting the text from Jasmine, keeping us on time. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the other participants. I loved listening to all of your ideas, and I hope we can all stay connected and bring these ideas to fruition. And just thank you to my, friends who have helped me prep. We have a whole community behind us. I did not do this alone. To my colleagues who helped me, prep and just share their knowledge with me. And yeah, I have so many people to thank. I can't thank everyone. Now I know why they have the song. But I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. I really think everyone on this platform here today, this has just been a phenomenal experience, and I really appreciate the chance to kind of share my idea with all of you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you so much to all of our judges. I want to thank my co-host, Lauren, who's going to close out the show in a moment. It's truly an honor and so much fun to do this with you. But also our leadership at CNAS, Richard Fontaine, who kicked this off, Eli Ratner and Anna Sato Carson, who are the executives who were behind us 100% of the way in doing this. Talk about this out of the box event, and then doing it virtually when things change, and then making it part of our premier summer series. We are so grateful for your investment in the next generation of national security thinkers. Thank you to our contestants. You all put it out there today. You laid it on the line. And of course, thank you to the amazing audience that's been watching. That's my little thanks and goodbye. Lauren will give the proper goodbye and close out the show. It has been a pleasure and honor doing this with you all.
I echo all of Shai's thanks, with the addition of I could not have done this without Shai and his amazing team, which has worked so hard for the last few weeks to make all of this come out picture perfect, every detail thought of, every minute rehearsed. This was an incredibly well done event, and you guys deserve all the congratulations and positive feedback in the world. Contestants, you were great. Judges, Carrie, Dave, Christine, and Cole, thank you so much. And then Michelle and Mike, thank you so much for giving your time and your really incredible and candid advice at the end of the day. Also want to recognize Alex Gallo and Common Mission Project for their support and helping make this event happen. We couldn't have done it without you. And I really loved your inspiration of taking this, helping us think through taking these ideas from concepts to implementation. Audience, you have been a delight. I'm so excited that you've been with us throughout the entire day. We will hopefully see all of you in person again next year when we do this live and make this an annual tradition here at CNAS. The pitch, I think, is emblematic of our mission to promote, elevate, and really showcase the next generation of leaders and ideas. And we are so excited to have started this tradition with all of you this time. So with that, it is now 4:50. I am going to stand for the first time in a few hours, and also I think pour myself a congratulatory glass of water after what has been a long and incredibly rewarding day. So thank you all. See you next year.